guess know. It's a festival that exists since 14 years. It's both an international film festival with huge films and 2 international competitions. The jury presidents this year were Barbara Hendricks and Moroccan filmmaker Nabila Yoush. And also a high-level platform facing the Human Rights Council, a place where we raise all the debates that are not necessarily raised at the UN. So this year, the huge ambition of the festival was really to open up. The slogan was, Ouvrons le débat, open up the debate. We could see this slogan in so many various ways. We first opened up, of course, the debates, including debates on the field, broadcasted directly on the field, in Congo, in Cambodia, in China, in Pakistan. But we also opened up the debate in Geneva, in the different communities, opening up in 37 new places in Geneva, including migrants' homes, hospitals, community centers, schools, prisons, and so many places. It has been, until now, a huge success, and we're waiting for Gaël Garcia Bernal this Saturday that is coming to the Foyer du Saconnet to present his film, The Motorcycle Diaries, with migrant people, of course. Open up the debate is also a slogan that we will explore today with this event that Laura Longobardi proposed to me 1 year ago in Oslo. We went to see the Good Pitch Europe, fantastic event, and we immediately thought we have to bring this to Geneva. Geneva, capital of human rights. Geneva, where so many international institutions, so many NGOs, so many committed people, so many migrant community, foreign communities are, and where we perfectly know that there are so many people that want to help and that want to contribute. And in parallel, Geneva, the birthplace of so many committed filmmakers also. You probably know that the best Swiss films, the ones that you see everywhere around the world, are films about social justice. So it seemed immediately completely natural for us to start this collaboration that we hope will continue in the future. We're starting this year with a first morning called Putting Good Films to Good Uses, a window to good pitch. The city of Geneva and Fonction Cinema have been partnering the event, and we thank them very much, as well as the Swiss Office for Culture, the Swiss Swiss Cultural Affairs Department. Please welcome on stage Laura Longobardi, the head of project. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you so much for being here. It's great to see this full room here in Geneva 1 year after we started thinking about this. And I would like to thank all those partners that made this possible, and all the speakers, thank you, and all the speakers who made the trip to come here to Geneva. So in the next 3 hours, you will hear and see about non-conventional ways to finance, produce, and use films as powerful tools for social change. We've tried to bring together players from different backgrounds, but who share a similar vision on how the world could become a better place, and spend their time and talent to bring their contributions to their vision. So in this first part of the morning, we will hear from filmmakers who have teamed up with foundations and NGOs to create powerful films that have had a real impact on the inequalities that they were contributing to report. And then we will hear from foundations and NGOs on how they could make use of those films, and which were the challenges that they were going through that process. So we hope that by the end of the morning, you will be inspired by these great stories and great films, which were made possible through unconventional alliances and the change that they brought into this reality. And we also hope that this session will contribute to forge new, unexpected alliances that will allow more powerful, amazing films to be done that can make a difference. So now, let's kick off the day with a very special guest. We are very honored and happy to welcome Cara Mertes, the director of JustFilms from the Ford Foundation, who will address her keynote, and I think we can start rolling the tape of JustFilm. Thank you.
we are just waiting to see if, do you think the tape will, the video, or should we go ahead? Yeah, go ahead. All right, but then perhaps at the end. So you can imagine beautiful music, lots of shots of beautiful films that have been made. Many of the filmmakers are here today, actually, that we've worked with. And then at the end, crescendo, you all clap, and then I appear. And here I am. Thank you. So I am Cara Mertes. I'm the director of JustFilms at the Ford Foundation. And thank you for welcoming us to Geneva. This is really an incredible room, and I want to thank the Film Festival, Laura, Isabel, everybody that has put this together, and also the Good Pitch team that has also opened up their contacts and invited all of you to this moment, which hasn't happened before in Geneva, for Good Pitch. And this is something that's very exciting for us. At Ford Foundation, I am running the initiative, which is the latest effort on the part of the Ford Foundation to support new, innovative film and media projects concerned with contemporary issues, and we also fund the institutions that support them. So I'd like to think that if you see a film that you like, if you scratch the surface and look down and actually see the organizations and the funding, often you will find somebody from Ford Foundation has been involved in this. Good Pitch, which we're here for today, is a project that holds so much promise as an ambassador for film, as a necessary strategy in a shared project of imagining a world where each person's dignity and worth is equally upheld. And since we have presentations on Good Pitch and several film projects by the artists themselves, I'm going to just take about 12 minutes to spend time talking about why these efforts are important to the people in this room. So I'm going to try and do that. I just arrived yesterday from Doha in Qatar, where the second Qumra gathering was being held, supported by the Qatari government. And as many of you may know, Qumra refers to camera in Arabic. And in Doha, 33 Arab-led filmmakers film teams actually were invited from across the Middle East and North Africa to meet with funders, producers, and industry to get advice and hear from some of the great masters in cinema. And Ila Suleiman, who some of you may know, is a very accomplished Palestinian filmmaker. And when he speaks about his work, he says simply that film does not stop at a checkpoint. For him, the reasons for designing a film endeavor in the Gulf region are to promote the poetic imagination as an end unto itself, one which creates the space to imagine a future with less suffering through a story technology, cinema, which has a freedom of movement that people often do not. We see that story itself can be seen as a kind of social currency that circulates, as capital does, crossing borders and influencing outcomes for good and for ill. And so we ask, how can this new cadre of social justice stories strengthen rather than marginalize those who are least resourced? We see artists as cultural leaders, building new audiences for this authentic storytelling, and each vision is unique. And with every filmmaker comes the story of their journey, often through great obstacles. And we learn how these experiences inform their decision to carry stories forward, especially in a region suffering some of the worst violence and instability since World War II, and which is now Europe's great challenge. This urge to tell the truth about your world is not only in places of conflict, it is everywhere, across generation and across geography. And it's this impulse to truth tell that I want to explore with you today as a process that accelerates the journey to justice. Each of us here believes in a best way to accomplish the task of increasing justice. Work in human rights and social justice demands passion and intelligence, and many in this room work through law, some through science and medicine, through advocacy, economic strategies, human and civil rights, organizing, and diplomacy. And Geneva itself is long known for working across these areas in an integrated way. But to add to this powerful set of approaches, I believe in the power of film itself as a pathway to peace and justice. And there is a certain kind of filmmaking where the ends and the means are actually inseparable. And this, for me, is film as an act of justice. These films have come from community, lifted the voices of community, reached audiences, and re-entered those communities to positive effect. And this kind of filmmaking, which is often but not exclusively nonfiction, is, I believe, underutilized and not as broadly embraced as it might be. And this may be in part because film and other creative acts can seem mysterious, unpredictable, unmeasurable in some way, and diffuse in their impact. And we are here today as panelists and storytellers to offer a different view, one that holds that these films and filmmakers are crucial architects of a peaceful and just society and are as central as lawyers, judges, human rights defenders, economists, journalists, and politicians. Why do I believe this? And more importantly, why do I ask you to believe this too? Because our challenges are many and complex. Our timeline is urgent, and so we need to better understand how cinematic storytelling can accelerate the change that we seek. In his 1970 Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, Alexander Solzhenitsyn remarked, "If only there were evil people out there, insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were just simple, we could separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line between dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who among us is willing to destroy a piece of their own heart?" Film is an art form in the hands of the artists you will hear from today, which can accomplish this astonishing feat of inviting people to face their own dual natures and confront their capacity for both healing and harm. An accumulation of such stories provides steady reinforcement for critical inquiry, a demand to know why and how certain realities have come to be. And this state of questioning existing structures and systems of privilege and power which dictate daily conditions is the beginning of justice, and you can see it in the actions of the subjects of these films, the drive to reveal, to recount, and to witness. Film has the ability, like journalism, to inform us about injustice as it's lived, and it has the power, like great art, to trigger the imagination and to demand articulation. At its best, film is both informational and transformational. It is the modern era's most perfect example, most powerful example of using storytelling, which is the basic mechanism through which humans resolve the ongoing tension between our best and our worst acts. Storytelling is how we move forward from the paralysis that deep contradiction can hold us in. And this dual power of film is why Ford has seen film as a key ingredient in continuing work toward dignity and democracy. Seeing film and justice as intertwined is a hallmark of Ford Foundation's commitment to human dignity, and for over 50 years, it has supported essential stories and new modes of storytelling that remind us how dignity feels and what the road to it looks like. Their impact can be seen in the way that they have become touchstones for eras and movements, a shorthand for entire historical events, a way of understanding history that has been transformed by the films themselves. This kind of filmmaking is itself a microcosm of the processes of peacemaking. It's collaborative and cooperative in nature. It entails a multitude of decisions and compromises which must be resolved for completion. And as each film seeks narrative resolution on screen, it propels dialogue and an off-screen dynamic, which can often be harnessed for building stronger community and greater tolerance and understanding. And in these projects, a filmmaker's means will always inform the end result. Every frame of footage speaks of the director's intention, the ethics of inquiry with subjects, the telling of which stories to whom and how mirror any human interaction where greater understanding, tolerance, and beneficial coexistence are the goals. When I started to work in film and change-making in the late 1980s, some of the great documentary films in the US had been and were being made, and they were always linked to seminal social movements of the day, the labor movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, AIDS activism, human rights, racial justice. The films were symbolic of each era. Harlan County, USA, Rosie the Riveter, When the Mountains Tremble, Babies Not Banners, The Times of Harvey Milk, and Tongues Untied. Current examples are more global and expand this film genealogy. The work of Leonard Rettel Helmrich, Richie Pan, Laura Poitras, Francis Reed and Deborah Hoffman, Tet Sambeth and Rob Lemkin, Pamela Yates and Paco de Onis, Joshua Oppenheimer. They have collectively spent over 100 years pursuing cinema projects which are not only about injustice, they are themselves acts of justice and reconciliation. And these particular artists that I'm referring to now don't always see themselves as aligned with movements. They're working on themes that arc across history, which are of interest to us here: genocide, secrecy, impunity, corruption. Their films propose that resolution of a generational trauma requires an encounter between the perpetrators of violence and their victims in a way that recasts the power dynamics of the original encounter. Justice must be served, whether through legal mechanisms like a court or a focus on the most human of acts, individual forgiveness. Sometimes one can lead to another, and sometimes film itself can deliver a type of justice simply by capturing and honoring a story that has been unheard or actively ignored. And this is the heart of the truth and reconciliation process, and sometimes the key to great filmmaking. These artists tend to work across decades over a series of films with a central organizing principle. They use one of the meanings behind Jean Rouche's term vérité, which is to provoke. And as philosopher Edgar Morin describes it, it is not to pretend to present the truth. Rather, it is to present the problem of truth. Academy Award nominated director Joshua Oppenheimer, who did The Act of Killing and Look of Silence, reminds us that in this sense, that the presence of a camera does not simply record reality, rather it provokes a witnessing and a rendering of reality that reveals deeper truths. He spent over a decade creating 2 transformative films, which together pose the problem of truth for the perpetrators and for the victims of genocidal violence in Indonesia at a time when these 2 groups continue to live in intimate proximity. Academy Award winner Laura Poitras has been investigating and exploring the implications of a post-9/11 world in her trilogy. Yates and Deonis take on genocide and have driven a truth and reconciliation process in Guatemala over decades in When the Mountains Tremble and the follow-up Granito. As filmmaker and journalist, That Sambeth worked with Rob Lemkin for over a decade to uncover the truth of a Cambodian genocide in Enemies of the People. Cambodian filmmaker Riti Pran's extraordinary opus is rooted in the same genocide, and Indonesian Leonard Retel Helmrich's trilogy follows 3 generations of an Indonesian family who conduct their lives under the rule of fear. And finally, Reed and Hoffman's Long Night's Journey into Day defined for many South Africans the struggle against apartheid. These are necessary stories for a new generation to hear. It's in our nature to deny our own capacity for indifference and violence. In the same Nobel acceptance speech, Solzhenitsyn notes that falsehood cannot hold out much against much in this world, but not against art. Falsehood can hold out against much in this world, but not against art. And no sooner will falsehood be dispersed than the nakedness of violence will be revealed in all its ugliness, and violence, decrepit, will fall. When done with integrity, clarity of vision, and powerful imagination, these reframing stories will move swiftly because they are so necessary, and at best they will help all of us in this critical time to reimagine problems and solutions. These films are miracles of existence, and we must better understand their power. In the words of the late Black gay activist filmmaker Marlon Riggs, silence kills the soul. It diminishes its possibilities to rise and fly and explore. Silence withers what makes you human. The soul shrinks until it's nothing. These films and filmmakers are not silent. With their courage and the bravery of the people who appear in their films, they're creating the conditions for justice to be expanded and reproduced. These films have opened spaces across entire countries to finally speak about a generations-long rule of fear, and at their most powerful, they shake the foundations of our assumptions as viewers, destabilizing our certainties, and that is what justice requires, an encounter with the other, in such a way as to expose and transform the mental frameworks of each. I believe we are now in a position to identify, strengthen, and connect a global North and global South network of social justice storytellers and organizations that support this content, and raise the visibility of the value of social justice storytelling around the world. Why do we think this will make a difference? We know that if you succeed in denying someone culturally, they have less value economically and politically. And once devalued, those in power can place legal barriers to opportunities of all kinds on them and their communities, and maintain them with narratives that reinforce these structures. Film, as an act of justice, strives to reverse this process. Through investigating in storytellers and leadership, we support a film practice which equalizes and liberates rather than privileging voices that isolate and constrain. We want to bring Global South stories and artists to the fore and Global South leadership to the tables of power where representation is decided. And by investing in networking the storytelling and leadership talent, we're building a dynamic, generative, social justice film ecology capable of leading the field into a decade where these stories are necessary and demanded, and never more than in this moment. Thank you for having us here today, and I'll turn it over now to Beadie.
Yeah, well, I would like to thank you, Cara.
And maybe we'll play the trailer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cara. Yeah, it's really a pleasure to have you here, and it's great. The work that you're doing with JustFilms is just amazing with the filmmakers and really making these films possible. And Ford Foundation this year is also one of the supporters of the film festival, so we would really like to thank you for that. So, yeah, thank you very much. And now I think we can roll the tape. And then I will ask Beadie Finzi, who is director of Britdoc, to join us, and she will lead us through the rest of the morning. Thank you.
In Detroit, you're watching it live. These are houses that are never coming back. Repent, when you for the forgiveness of your sin.
They keep saying, are you rich? Are you poor? Are you rich? Are you poor?
It's about the sanctity of human liberty and the cost of it if you want to take it.
I know. Keep your head up. Don't look down.
We just can't disappear. We just can't.
If he's found guilty, it will break him.
To stand up, to fight back, is just incredible.
While this is working. So hello, good morning. I'm Beadie Finzi from Britdoc Foundation, and a huge thanks to all the team here who've been fantastic, and to Cara for that amazing framing for the conversation for the rest of the morning. Britdoc Foundation, we came into being about 10 years ago, and at the time we thought the single most important contribution that we could make as a foundation was to create a new independent fund for filmmakers based here in Europe, and it was modeled on colleagues in the States, from Sundance to the Ford Foundation. And, we looked at what was going on in North America, and we thought, actually, this is a fascinating opportunity. Let's create a new independent fund and try to cultivate some of the fantastic projects we're seeing. But very quickly, and I'd say almost within a year to 18 months, it became clear that there was a larger systemic challenge which we wanted to address. Everyone in this room knows that the last 10, 15 years have been a revolution disruption in the making and the delivery of media. From the means of production, literally from the physical cameras that are available to make our films, to the way we reach audiences. I mean, the internet has arrived, the little old internet, and what that means in terms of how we reach people. We've seen a weakening of the traditional funding and distribution partners in our broadcasters and public service systems. We've seen a weakening of those traditional print journalism giants. And that means a period of huge disruption. And if we're thinking about how to enable this fantastic community
of independent, brave, brilliant, urgent journalists and filmmakers. What do we need to do to improve the ecosystem, to future-proof the ecosystem? And really from this idea, this impetus, the idea for Good Pitch was born. Because the thought was this, actually. Maybe the challenge, maybe one of the most important contributions we can think about here is to reconnect filmmakers directly with organizations in civil society who share the same passions and preoccupations. And also encourage filmmakers to think about reconnecting with the audiences who really need to see their work, maybe the hard-to-reach communities, and to change that whole paradigm. So the Good Pitch program was born. We get the slides up. Do I press again? Oh. Try now. Okay, I've raced on ahead. And it was a very simple idea. How to connect the most excellent independent documentary filmmakers with organizations from across civil society who could use those films in their work. And this is the model. And we began as a total experiment some 8-9 years ago in Oxford on a very, very hot and sweaty afternoon. And we brought together a room full of extraordinary people who'd never met together to meet filmmakers. They were campaigners, foundations, there were brands, there were activists. And immediately something magical began to happen, and we began to understand we had something very special in our hands. And this fundamental idea that we can help make mutually beneficial partnerships that are good for the film, good for the partners, and good for society was born. So now, since then, almost 200 film projects have been presented around the world at Good Pitch events since 2008, including an extraordinary raft of, some of the finest films that you've all enjoyed over the past decade. And this is critical too. Nearly 3,000 different organizations from across civil society has been welcomed into a room much like this to meet those filmmakers and to consider maybe for the first time, how could I work with you? What is the potential of my organization and my networks to work with you and help your film go further? The model's now spread. We started out in Europe and in the UK, and then rapidly moved to the States. And now there are Good Pitch events being held around the world. The next one this year is in Stockholm, in Sweden, and then the program goes to East Africa for the first time, and then back to Australia, and then to New York at the end of the year. So very briefly, what does the event look like? On one level, this looks like a traditional pitching forum, which many of you will be familiar with. The film teams have spent 6 to 8 months going through a program of training and mentorship, where we really try to help them to analyze what is it that I want to do with this film, what's the potential of this film, and who is my dream team of partners that I could put together. And we do a series of workshops, and we spend about 3-4 months reaching out to different organizations to attract them to this live event, which is the Good Pitch event itself. And on that day, the filmmakers present to a room of around 300 or 400 people, and they have to, in just 7 minutes, explain what their film is, what they want to do with it, and what they need. And it's really tough, and they're completely brilliant. And then we invite a conversation around the table where all of the invited organizations are asked a very simple and essential question. What can I do to help? What ideas do I have? What connections can I have to make for you? And sometimes that's, about money, about a grant opportunity perhaps, but more often than not, it's about a fantastic connection. Well, maybe I could connect you to, I have a contact in in a special select committee. We have a membership of many thousand in a given country. Would that be useful to you? It's thinking about what are all the assets that we had that could really make this project and this social justice campaign go. And then the idea is that at this table, we're forging the beginning of a coalition and the start of a conversation. And we track all of the Good Pitch filmmakers that have ever been through the project. Every year we get back in touch to find on, and it's completely fascinating to see 3, 4, 5 years after a Good Pitch event, those connections bearing fruit and turning into meaningful discussion. So what's the actual results? And this is the key thing everyone wants to know. A lot of money has been raised for films. Over $23 million has been raised in the support of both film production, but also outreach and impact campaigns. And over 81% of filmmakers who've participated have secured funding, either for production or outreach, taking part in the program. But this, for us, is the most significant thing. There's over 1,200 new strategic partnerships have been forged. So for us, this is the beyond money piece, and this is the really key thing. We've now seen good pitch films. There are currently 87 good pitch films, which are at the heart of major national or international social justice campaigns. Films that are now going to be deployed, as Cara says, not just for one night on TV or a week or two at the cinema, but are going to be used for years at the community level, whatever is required from campaigners, from activists, deployed in the field. So this has a great effect for the individual filmmakers that take part. There's a beautiful shot of Jen Bray at Good Pitch New York last year, who had an extraordinary Good Pitch day. But I just, want to step back for a minute and think about the bigger context here, because we're going to hear from 3 incredible filmmakers in a minute, and I want to be clear, we are seeing these films becoming the heart of highly strategic political campaigns, being used to challenge the practice of major corporations, being used in the environmental movement, in the disability movement, in the LGBT rights movement, and of course gun control. So it feels like now there is no issue. There's no kind of cliche about what is a social justice film going to look like, what's its role in a social justice campaign. It's as wide and as broad and as profound as the imagination and the vision of both the filmmakers and the campaigners they're working with. So we need to crack on now and meet some of these filmmakers. We have got 3 extraordinary teams here who are going to share their practice with you today. And, they are tenacious. They've been doing this work. I'm going to start with Pam and Paco, who are field leaders and who, frankly, not only have been brilliant in their vision over the last decades in the way that they've worked through film, but actually profoundly generous in the way that they've shared that practice in the field and are now, as much as anything else, also training, enabling, and inspiring so many others. So I would love to welcome them up, and let's hear their model, their ideas, and their practice, and get inspired by that. A round of applause, please.
Thank you. I think I have to put this up again. Bear with me. We just have to switch. Yeah. How's that? Okay. Thank you. So yes, I'm Paco Dionis, the Executive Director of Skylight.
And I'm Pamela Yates, the Creative Director of Skylight. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today to share our experiences.
Skylight is a nonprofit human rights media organization. And we're based in Brooklyn, but we work all around the world, working with civil society partners and movement actors. And we create feature-length documentaries which become the flagships of media ecosystems, which consist of a range of media assets with companion digital projects, short films, community radio and television, social media strategies that educate and engage and activate alternative narratives for social justice. So over 30 years, we've been building these outreach and engagement strategies based on these experiences, these opportunities, and available technologies.
As many of you know, the films we've always been making have been about exposing and denouncing human rights abuses. They've been champion human rights defenders. But with Disruption, our new film, we're telling a new kind of story, an avenue to social change via the creation of economic rights for women. In Disruption, we've introduced a cast of unlikely allies: governments, big banks, social entrepreneurs, and women living in poverty, all interacting around government conditional cash transfer programs, government funds to women living below the poverty line. These unlikely allies are developing innovative ideas coming from the global south, but to teach to the rest of the world. What if we could imagine a different world? A world without the extremes of wealth and poverty. a world in which women are a driving political force. This is the idea behind disruption, and this is the idea that we took out into the world. Let's watch the trailer for Disruption.
Construir é demonstrar que eu posso quebrar esse ciclo que ficou naturalizado na sociedade brasileira e na sociedade latino-americana. É que os pobres do futuro são filhos dos pobres do passado.
Hay pobres de trato 1 que ya viven de una forma diferente. Viven apenas llueve, se les moja todo adentro de las casas. Así que más que todas esas mujeres están sufriendo todavía con sus hijos, aunque se suene así como algo loco, pero es así.
Soy economista, financista, y una respuesta que más me gusta. Mi profesión es perturbar el orden preestablecido.
Yo misma iba de casa en casa y las señoras decían, están locos, si yo no tengo ni 1000 para el pan, ¿qué voy a ahorrar?
Nosotros nunca habíamos conocido lo que es banco, lo que es ahorro, lo que es sistema financiero.
The city wasn't intentionally going out of its way to fund women per se, but we realized that the best way to reach and drive financial inclusion was through working with women. The engagement with the client is actually where the value is.
Dejamos de colocar crédito microdeuda a los pobres y fomentemos su capacidad de ahorro.
No tenemos por qué estar ahí como mujeres en la casa. Nuestra vida está en todo lo que es nuestra comunidad, en nuestro distrito, en el Estado mismo, involucrados, ¿no?
Thank you. So our film takes this counterintuitive idea of savings programs built on top of government cash transfers out into the world. And our world premiere was at the Movies That Matter Film Festival in The Hague. You know, we're always learning from our audiences to develop our outreach, starting with the festivals. And in The Hague, the audience responded enthusiastically to the proposed actionable solutions. Two of the women in the film, Ani Benitez and Agripina Perea, came with us. And after the screening, audiences clustered around them, wanting to take further this idea of actionable solutions. This was repeated in film festivals around the world. The film festivals give the film a presence. We also make invaluable contacts, and we create new partnerships at the festivals. And Disruption screened in festivals across 4 continents.
When we presented the film in Brazil, we got a sense of the spectrum of audiences which responded to the film, which allowed us to adapt our outreach strategies. And in Brazil, as many of you probably know, Bolsa Familia is the big cash transfer program. There's the biggest cash transfer program in the world. It reaches 15 million women and their families, so that's about 50 million people, a huge chunk of the Brazilian population. And this film, we found, was appealing in Brazil to different sectors of society. You know, Bolsa Familia is supported by different sectors of society in Brazil, but there's a big concern about a culture of dependency being formed around it. And so audiences responded to the idea of the film, which is don't give a fish to the women, teach them how to fish, and creating a sustainable exit from poverty. So in Sao Paulo, we had a group of public policy students from the Getúlio Vargas Foundation approach us after the screening, and they wanted to take the film to the foundation and include it in their public policy curriculum, which they have. And then in Rio, we showed it at the Oi Kaboom Institute, which has a film school for students from the favelas of Rio. And there the reaction was very personal because all of these students have grown up in families that receive Bolsa Familia. And across the board, the reaction was, my mother and our community need to see this film. And so from there, we also made contact with TV Futura in Brazil, which is the largest educational broadcaster, reaching 43 million people. They broadcast the film, and they also keep it online, and they included it in their Why Poverty series. We also contacted TAL, Televisión América Latina, which is a network of community television stations across Latin America, about 400 of these community television stations, and have made the film available to all of these stations. Going from there, in Colombia, we designed a tour called the Disrupt Poverty Tour, and there we partnered with Cine Vagabundo, which is a Colombian social justice mobile cinema organization, and also with Map Your World, which is an organization that has created apps for tablets for community mapping of needs assessments. It was a 10-week tour through Colombia, 10 weeks, 10 communities, a week in each one. And we brought the film to women who have never seen women like themselves reflected on film, sparking awareness that they are part of a broader social justice movement for women's economic and political empowerment. The tour went from Colombia to Ecuador and Peru. And then we learned from the women everywhere that they need follow-up after financial citizenship programs, and access to capital to start the collective businesses that they have imagined after getting the financial literacy program. So to take this newly acquired financial literacy to its full potential. Disruption becomes an organizing tool for women to exercise political power and demand resources from their public officials, and in many cases, they have decided to run for public office themselves and be part of that decision-making. One of the places we went to in Colombia is Guapi. Guapi is a community on the Pacific coast of Colombia, a fishing village, where 2,000 women have gone through this program. It takes 8 hours to get to Guapi by boat, so it's very remote, but the experience there was really quite extraordinary, and we're going to show you a little clip where the women from Guapi are speaking for themselves.
Para nosotros es siempre la mujer hemos sido una persona muy afectada. Para mí la vida es ser pobre, de trabajar por algo que lo sube con el sueldo de mi gente. A veces la transformación necesitamos apoyo. O sea, son pocas o somos pocas las que tenemos en este momentico esa visión.
Estamos invitando a todos los habitantes de Quiroga que se acerquen a la caseta donde los montaños a ver una película, la película Punto de Quiebre. Los esperamos en este momento. ¿Cómo están? Bien. A las 9 película. Allí.
Madres, lideresas, líderes comunitarios, ya saben, los estamos esperando en este momento en la caseta cerca de los montaños para que disfruten de este documental.
Una programación del Cine Vagabundo y Skylight Engagement. Los esperamos. Vamos a iniciar ya en 15 minutos.
En Colombia, la pobreza tiene rostro de mujer. La mujer es la que les toca más duro. Para mí la pobreza viene de la inequidad.
Pues que antes se manejaban que eran los hombres los que tenían derecho a estar en las reuniones importantes. Ya no, nos ponemos de acuerdo y decimos, bueno, vamos a ir a hacer esto, si tú estás de acuerdo o no estás de acuerdo, entonces ya se toman las decisiones por igual, porque yo también tengo derecho igual que tú.
Yo creo que esta película no es para que nosotras solamente la veamos, que la vean otras mujeres para que vean la importancia que tiene el ahorro y para salir de esa parte que la tienen sumisa.
Entonces uno mirando lo que ha sucedido allá, uno también tiene, ¿por qué nosotros también no podemos hacer lo mismo? Yo creo que en una organización allá, saldremos bastante adelante, porque yo, para mí la unión es la fuerza.
Porque uno solo no puede hacer tanto, ¿verdad? Pero teniendo más personas que lo apoyen y que lo ayuden a uno, claro que son fuertes y no son débiles. Somos mujeres capaces de salir en adelante. Somos mujeres con ese poder del líder.
Todos los países que me vean, quiero ser un ejemplo. Quiero demostrar a la gente que uno sí puede.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Following our grassroots screening tour throughout South America, we were invited by the Skoll Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship and the Sundance Institute to present Disruption at the Skoll World Forum, where 1,000 social entrepreneurs gather. This is a place to share ideas, solutions, and information. It's held every year at the University of Oxford Said Business School. And Fundación Capital, the social entrepreneur organization that is featured in Disruption, was given the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship. This comes with a $1.25 million award to the organization to help them expand their programs and to take other of their programs to scale. We designed Disruption to spread the ideas of financial citizenship around the world and to influence government and policymakers to adopt cash transfers and asset building programs. We were invited to show Disruption to the staff of the U.S. Treasury Department, and we were able to make good governmental contacts, and we have plans in development. Fundación Capital created innovative apps to take financial citizenship to scale, and these apps are distributed through tablets shared among women in a peer-to-peer learning environment.
Now in Brazil, we're designing a new sort of pilot outreach campaign. We've partnered with UBS Bank of Brazil, whose CEO is Silvia Coutinho. She has a very personal concern about financial literacy. She wants to see it spread far and wide in Brazil. She thinks it's extremely important. So with UBS Bank, with Fundación Capital, and the public policy students that we met at that screening, the first screening in Brazil, and the film students from the Oika Boom Institute, from the favelas, all of these together, we're going to do a tour of 8 communities in Brazil to meet the women and hear their stories and make short films, which will go on TV Futura and be also shown and made available to policymakers to improve the Bolsa Familia system.
So just to recap, we've designed our multi-year outreach and engagement campaign because often these campaigns really do take several years to develop and get off the ground, and we're committed to continuing them. So we've designed these campaigns to widen the circle of unlikely allies. The grassroots mobile cinemas, the social entrepreneurs, national and international banks, human rights film festivals, TV broadcasters, policy allies, students from the favelas, and the driving force, empowered women who are in the asset building programs that you meet in Disruption. They are championing the ideas of financial citizenship and becoming political actors. So please join us tonight for Disruption at the festival screening at the Grutli. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I hope you're all thinking about piercing, penetrating questions about this model. Can your filmmakers in the room put your hands up? Who's a filmmaker or works for a film production company? A few there. Mm-hmm. So do you listen to that and you go, I couldn't do that? Like, what are you talking about? That's not how I work. I mean, how do you react to hearing that? Come on, be brave. Please. Yeah? There's a lady here. Ask these people any question you like. They are the most transparent human beings on the planet.
Thank you, Beadie.
They'll tell you.
It's not working. Oh, yeah, it's okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I have a little problem because in one hand, you show us films, and for me, they are not films, they're kind of informations. So there are a lot of music, a lot of voice-over explaining the situation, but the film don't go in the deep reason why the situation is like that. We know, we see, yeah, they are really live in a difficult situation, and you say, they say, poverty comes from inequality. Okay, and so what? The film don't say why this situation, this inequality, why? And then you say the partner is UBS. So this is for me a big problem, you know?
Thank you for that. You know, we actually designed these short clips for this presentation. And so I would just like to reassure you that first and foremost, we're filmmakers, we're artists. But we've developed this model of taking our films and uniting it with movement actors to broaden the impact, not only of what we do, but of also what they do. If you really want to see the artistic film in its entirety, please come tonight to see it, because it really does tell the story. And it's a difficult and complex story to tell about financial citizenship. So these short clips are kind of shorthand. On the other hand, you raise a question that has been raised, especially with in human rights circles, which is how do we work with these unlikely allies? How can big banks and women living below poverty actually work together? Are there actionable solutions? And that's the question that has gone over and over and over again in the film.
Yeah, and I would just add that these are unlikely allies, UBS Bank or any other big bank. But to try to solve the problem of poverty at scale with millions and millions of people, the government also necessarily has to be involved. At least that's the idea behind the group in disruption, Fondation Capital, that is promoting these savings and asset building programs, built on top of the cash transfers. It's a controversial idea. We've encountered this controversy at almost every screening. But we thought we should put it out there because it's a different idea, a different approach to a solution for poverty. I thought we should at least consider it.
And I think you put your hand on probably one of, surely the thorniest question of the filmmakers who work in this way, which is, what does it mean to make partnerships and to secure funding from non-traditional partners? What does it mean in the production period? Does that challenge or affect our independence or artistry? Question. And secondly, and I'm imagining the UBS came on to support the outreach and engagement.
Correct.
All right. So UBS didn't fund the film, but they're helping make sure that film gets to the most vulnerable communities to have access. So I think I think it's a really interesting question, and we're seeing very different kinds of partners coming in at both phases.
That's also the question to Britdoc, your pitch. Because I saw many NGOs, and I see also Puma, I think. I don't know, it was too quick. But what will that mean when they're partners in these films? So there's a kind of dependence, Is it the guarantee that the filmmaker can make an independent film as he imagined a film? Is that always possible? Or with all these partners, is that a kind of propaganda of these organizations, or what is that?
I think it's. I think this is exactly the challenge that we have, which is, what do new partnerships look like and feel like? And I would say, as a challenge back, that I think, particularly if you make a financial transaction, that all money has a colour. And I would suggest that there are many broadcasters and commissioning editors that you might choose not to work with because they're going to put undue pressure in the edit suite on the shape of your film and the messaging in it. I think one of the central and the most important thing that we do as a community, and all the filmmakers that we've ever worked with do, is to preserve the absolute independence and integrity of the creative vision of the journalism of their project. And so the challenge is to say, okay, if I want to make a partnership, whoever you are, it's got to be a partnership which respects that in the end. And where I'm able to have credibility. And many filmmakers choose not to take, for example, potential support from campaign organizations or maybe brands in the production phase of their film to avoid exactly that question. Because they say, okay, maybe when the movie's done, you know, and then we can have this conversation. So you put your hand directly on one of the most interesting places. But it is the reality of our landscape. The traditional money is drying up. We have to make partnerships elsewhere. And actually, it's integral on all of us to think, who do I really want to make this relationship with? Do you understand and value my work? You have to respect my absolute independence and journalism integrity. And that's, you know, that's the challenge. But the exciting thing is it is happening. It is happening, and it is possible. So, you know.
I would also just like to add that the outreach and engagement campaigns are a key creative aspect to filmmaking for us. If I didn't do the outreach and engagement campaigns and go out with the films, it would be like chewing my food and not swallowing it. So I see it as an integral whole, and I know it can seem really daunting to filmmakers. It came very naturally to us because from our very first film 30 years ago, we were doing this. So every film tells a different story, right? So every film we're finding new audiences, and we're trying to bring together these unlikely allies.
Another question, please, at the back. So you in the middle, sorry. Can we pass the...
So yeah, you use these kind of like tech jargon words like disruption and unlikely allies, but I mean, there's nothing that unlikely about banks being allies in a program which is trying to encourage more people to open a bank account. And I mean, ultimately you say that the government has to be involved, but like your main, or one of your main partners, UBS, they're actively involved in helping corporations and individuals avoid paying taxes all across the world, and it's taxes which fund these cash transfer programs. So how can you justify partnering with an organization which is actively undermining the very goal your film is hoping to achieve?
Well, you know, you bring up a really good point because it's so complex. All these millions of women who are receiving Bolsa Familia, the idea behind this program is to make them financial citizens, and that means that they actually become part of the banking system, like all of us in this room, I'm sure, have bank accounts or, you know, some kind of credit card or so we work in the banking system even when we know that the banks are not behaving properly. But so why can't these women, these millions of women, also become part of it so that they can, as we see many times, we've seen while we're making the film, they do become politically active, politically conscious. They actually start running for office, and they become engaged in the decisions about their community. So I think that the financial empowerment goes hand in hand with that. And maybe they can become part of solving the ultimate problem of, you know, how should these big banks behave? Are they going to be accountable? Are they going to pay their taxes? Because we also, you know, all of us should be concerned about that. And I don't see why the millions of women there that are excluded from that should not become included in, you know, as financial citizens to be part of that decision making in a society.
Brilliant, love it. Come on, one more here. And...
Maybe you can swap UBS with Petrobras.
Maybe. I don't think there was a question. Okay, over here.
Hello. I work for human rights NGOs, so obviously reaching out to potentially isolated communities and audiences is key to our communications work. So my question was on the outreach campaign that you did. Did you prepare the audience? Did you do any work before the screening or afterwards? Was there any kind of follow-up? Was there any kind of engagement before and after the film? Thank you.
Yes, well, as you saw in the Disrupt Poverty tour through Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, we spent a week in each town. Most of them were rural communities, very isolated communities, where many, many people are living in poverty. So by being able to spend a week there, we were able to do before, during, and after. And as Paco briefly mentioned, there was a Map Your World project. Okay, that is a way of women coming together to collect data in their community on tablets about what are the greatest needs. And that's when we really began to discover that the financial citizen and asset building programs weren't enough. They wanted much, much more. And if the government didn't give them more, or if the social entrepreneurs didn't give them more, they really felt wanting. Because all of a sudden there was this whole new thing opened up for them. And they wanted to pursue it. They wanted to actively get involved in small businesses, and they wanted to become politically active.
Can I jump in and ask one question, which is around this model of practice, a sustainability question. You know, this looks very different from a traditional filmmaking cycle, which is, you know, if I'm being commissioned to make a half hour or 50 minutes on television, I might work on that for 3 to 4 months. The film goes out, I start on the next one and move on and on and on and on. This is a very different way of life. How are you finding? How long will you work typically with a film, if you can even say that? And how do you live?
Okay, well, we work several years. In fact, some of the films, even the film we made in 2011, Granito, How to Nail a Dictator, we're still working with. So really, we make a commitment for several years, but those several years may turn into several more years, depending on how evergreen the films are. We don't make that many films, and so the films we make, we really want to last for a long time.
And as far as how we live, well, we're always fundraising, mostly from foundations, and there are film funds to help fund the films. But a few years ago, we made the decision to restructure as a nonprofit organization because it just made more sense for us and the kind of work we do. And because of these long-term commitments to the films, so it just goes many years past the production and release of the film. So that expanded our capacity for fundraising as well. But basically, we live by fundraising a lot and just managing to keep doing the work.
And I would also say to the independent filmmakers and production people in the room, we also helped to create a independent filmmaker cooperative called New Day Films. And this has created a very robust market for educational films or documentary films in the US market, and it's been a very important source of revenue. It's also a way for over 100 filmmakers to share empirical knowledge about the field that's out there and to come together and have more community and less competition, but be able to really understand how we can have sustainability and how we can develop free pay models, meaning have people pay to screen the films and to bring us as filmmakers where it's possible, and to offer the film for free where that's not possible. Because we want these human rights films to be out there, right? We want them to be seen. We want them to be bootlegged.
And just to touch on the economics a little bit more, again, for those that are interested, people often say, most of us in this room might understand, the average price of an average feature doc, which sits somewhere, on a kind of bell curve between, let's keep it in euros, between 250, 300,000 euros, right the way up to maybe $1 million, depending on where the film is, how long it's shot for, so on and so forth. We're seeing a trend now over time of filmmakers able to raise outreach and engagement funds. It can be as modest as a few tens of thousands of dollars towards their work and towards their activity, right the way up to $1 million plus. And that gives them and their partners the fuel to work with the films in these very intense and prescriptive ways for years. So I just wanted to give you a sense that there is this entire kind of burgeoning sort of second economy developing, both expertise but also finance and support around taking the film to audiences who need it. So it's a sort of fascinating development of the last decade. We're going to move on now, but I just want to say a huge thank you to you both. And guys, go and see their movie tonight.
Thank you.
So I'd love to welcome up Joanna Natsagara, who is rapidly getting a reputation in our business for taking on some of the most dastardly criminal corporations and corrupt governments. In fact, if they're not that, she's not interested in working on the film project. An extraordinary inspiration to many of us with your unbelievable tenacity over the past few years, and I'm so excited to have her share some of her practice and the work that she's doing with her films. Thank you, Jo.
Thank you, Beadie. Well, I have to say, it's really nerve-wracking to talk after Paco and Pam. Huge fan of your work, and I just think your tenacity has been a real inspiration to the community. So thank you. I'm going to talk to you today. I'm a producer and an impact producer. I'm going to talk to you today about a film called Virunga, which was a feature doc that went through the Good Pitch process twice about a national park in eastern Congo. It's a World Heritage Site. It's the home to the last of the mountain gorillas and also to around 4 million people that live within 1 day's walk of the park's borders. An oil company, a British oil company called Soco International, gained a concession license for part of the park, and they wanted to exploit oil underneath this precious protected area. We knew this would be a major environmental threat for the park, but we also knew that it would be a destabilizing force for an area of the world that had seen so much war. This is the region of the world that most of the war in Congo had started in. Over 6 million people had died there. The park itself, which is actually a government institution, began an investigation into Soco because the work to potentially drill under the park was illegal in both national and international law. But when the park director met the director of the film, Orlando, they decided that documenting that evidence gathering through film might be more powerful. And as the evidence mounted, we realized that as a team that these were not just environmental concerns, that actually there were corruption allegations and human rights violations happening. There are lots of organizations that were already concerned about what was happening there, but we knew that there needed to be a very big splash to ensure that there was a chance to defeat a billion-dollar oil company with a very big team of lawyers and PRs. I'd like to show you the trailer now. If we can.
Le parc national de Virunga, c'est la vie de la communauté. C'est dans cette entité-là où vous pouvez encore trouver les gorilles des montagnes. C'est ça ma vie. Ils ont l'amour.
I think that we have a problem.
Companies are exploring for oil. I came here to cover the security situation.
I was sworn in to ensure that Virunga National Park's protected. Oil companies have a reputation for controversial ventures. All their efforts are focused on the national park.
In the past, it has brought a lot of violence here. Everyone wants their slice of the cake.
This isn't a war yet, but it could be soon.
Companies are playing with fire.
Fear has driven people out of these villages.
If we leave, we would lose everything.
The national park is the only hope this region has.
You must justify why you are on this earth.
Finalement, nous serons aussi jugés. Nous allons seulement croiser le bras quand le parc sera en train de disparaître.
Pourtant, notre souhait est que ce parc reste immortel.
So we knew we had a tough call on our hands, and that it would be actually a very dangerous thing to take on this company. The local civil society particularly were already receiving death threats, and from those who were aligned with the oil company. We knew that we needed to galvanize a huge group of stakeholders, and this entire project is really the list. I couldn't tell you everybody because there are so many. But what we did was we used the moment of the film's release to galvanize this very wide group of stakeholders. And as Paco and Pam mentioned, we used many unlikely allies, as well as the likely allies from civil society all the way through to actually the company's own investors. So this kind of amazing group of individuals, NGOs, foundations, high-profile actors, civil society on the ground, government actors, organizations like the WEF, who I know are in the room, Human Rights Watch, Global Witness, to actually make sure that everybody was focused on this long-term objective. The common goal was clear, but this was a moment for people to use their individual strengths and roles to really make sure that we could achieve something. So now I would like to show you a very short impact film that we made. We made it roughly about a year ago, so it's not up to date, but it will show you what happened in the first year of our work.
Called on company authorities to investigate these acts of violence and intimidation and to ensure that both the park rangers and the activists can express their views freely without risking their lives.
Virunga in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
You may not have heard of Virunga National Park.
Oil
reserves making it a target for British oil companies.
Go international, but telling us we're a supporter of Mark Russell.
We're talking about, of course, this oil.
To explore in Virunga.
Shot, ambushed in an assassination attempt.
What makes it so unique? Now we're very pleased to say that 1 year later, SOCO International did fully withdraw from Virunga. And the Church of England divested their entire stake because SOCO were being so difficult. And the church is now heading a group of investors that are committed to not only working in Virunga, but actually writing a new ethical policy for the entire extractive community so that other World Heritage Sites and other protected areas and communities can actually be protected by the investors like them and others. So since last June, the film was available on Netflix. We chose to work with Netflix because they could speedily deliver the film to many countries around the world, and not in a single broadcast, but actually the film is consistently available now and for the next 20 years in now 190 countries. They also allowed us to do non-theatrical screenings and special screenings in festivals and with communities in over 132 countries. So that was the best model for us to get the film out very, very quickly to a huge amount of people.
So the park has gone from strength to strength. The film and the kind of profile around it meant that many other actors came with, and there were many unintended consequences. The park itself has a very big sustainable development goal vision, and over the past 2 years has started to really see that come to light. So the park has actually raised over 70 million in the past 2 years towards its green economy, and that is growing. Just this year, in fact, the president came to turn on the first microhydro plant in Virunga, and we managed, one of the big goals of the film was to hold the oil company to account without damaging the relations between the Congolese government and the park, who are civil servants. And the president's visit, I think, proved that that was also achieved. So the park is focused on moving ahead. There are still grumbles around the oil license. These things don't fully go away. At the moment, there's some noises on the Ugandan side. But what is true is that the park is very much stronger and more ready to deal with those kind of issues now. And behind them, they have a very engaged community, from high profile to public, all around the work, who all remain committed to its protection.
Amazing, amazing. So this was a movie. So this is a first-time film team who actually end up very quickly. It becomes with a sort of, in traditional terms, a kind of hit on your hands. I mean, this is a film that enjoyed an incredible kind of year of awards and, climaxing in Oscar nomination. An extraordinary ride for a film that got all the kind of the film and the kind of industry accolade, but actually partnering alongside it and indeed developed through the production of the film was this, it was almost point perfect kind of impact campaign masterminded by you. You have remained, I know you have other projects in a company looking after other films, but how far will you remain committed to Virunga and, continuing the pressure with this? What's your own kind of personal commitment to that?
Yeah, I'm still working with the park. I'm both on the board of the foundation that runs the park, and I'm the director of communications. So, looks like.
Did that? That wasn't the case before. This has happened.
No. This happened because of it and because of the good working relationship from the film. So yeah. And actually, Orlando, the director, also remains very committed to the park. Again, as Paco and Pamela said, these projects don't leave you. The commitment is very real.
Questions for Jo and the way she took on an oil corporation. This is a very, very different model. Very crudely speaking, you had Pam and Paco talking about an incredibly kind of grassroots focused, taking a film and bringing it directly to some of the most marginalised communities imaginable and engaging them with the issues. Jo is I'm going to say a master at some of the kind of classic top-down strategies, identifying how to put the pincers on, whether it be high-level government officials or corporate bodies, and knowing how to make that work. So think about your questions in relation to that and the kind of strategies she deployed. Sir, you're waving at me practically.
Yeah, well, I've got a microphone, so I thought it might help. Hi, my name's Chris.
Where are you from, sir? I've been told off, and not everyone meant to say where they're from.
I work for the International Committee of the Red Cross, but
welcome.
But my experience is prior. I know a little bit about the region. Can you just tell us, because there are people from NGOs in the room, can you tell us about the relationship with the civil society network a little bit more? Because obviously there are a number of wildlife organisations involved in protecting mountain gorillas, and there are clearly, microeconomic activities and stuff like that. I think the audience microeconomic activities taking place in the region as well. And I want to know the level of support that you got. Other people make films in that part of the world. It'd be just good to hear part of that story about how those other organisations, how supportive were they? How easy was that? How difficult was that?
There's a wide range of answers to that, because you're right. There's a lot of. Obviously DRC being, having suffered so much, almost every NGO on the planet is in there, from conservation to human rights. Certainly on this film, we had a lot of support, both from the conservation NGOs and from others, from Human Rights Watch, from Global Witness, those kind of NGOs. We also had some difficulties. I won't pull any punches, and I think if you read the impact report on Virunga on the Britdoc website, you'll get a fuller picture of those. It's probably not appropriate to go into all of those right now. But the answer is, everything from slightly troubling to incredibly, incredibly successful.
Who's next? Sir, you got a question this time, right? Wait for the microphone or I'll get told off again. Come on.
Yes, since you didn't hear a question in my first attempt, I will make a second attempt with Virunga. We are here under the heading of the good. This is repeated in the title. And my general question, is it good to shun, to avoid the difficult and embarrassing questions? So I will illustrate that. I have seen your film, and I am quite happy that Soko can no longer harm my beloved gorillas. But still, there are a few difficult questions. First is that Soko has acted on a contract by the Congo government, a government which is led by a man long considered a puppet of our arch hero and saint, Paul Kagame. That's the first difficult question. The second question is that Soko is not, as far as I know, one of the majors we are so fond of throwing tomatoes at, saying they are ruling the world and making so much money, etc. Third, it is not even sure that even outsiders like Soko make that much easy money, since Thierry Michel, one of the filmmakers of this festival, he made films showing that most of these arch-greedy companies go bankrupt very soon. So there are a series of embarrassing questions, and we are masters in the art of avoiding difficult questions.
I'm still not sure what the question is. It is?
Okay. I'm happy that for the first time since my birth, I'm not the only one who understands my question.
I mean, I'd love to answer a question. Did you?
No, but it's okay. I am used. Let's go to the third.
Well, no, certainly. What I can say is, we're not in the business of discussing regional politics in that way. So we're filmmakers that came to, to support a 2-year investigation on a single company. So that's to your first point. To your second point, you're quite right. This is actually something that is indicative all over the world. And as I said, we're trying to use the film as precedent for extractive conversations all over the world, whether it be with these wildcat companies like Soko or with the majors. And actually, we need to excavate what that really looks like. And I hope that Virunga presents an example of what this really looks like on the ground, and that can widen out. That's part of the reason we actually showed it at the WEF, so that other corporations, from majors to wildcat companies, could see, well, this is what it looks like. This is what the undercover work looks like. This is what it actually looks like on the ground. So I hope that answers your second one.
I did understand you.
Okay.
Please, this lady here. Oh, sorry, there's someone clicking at the back. That's terrible. All right, this one here and then 2 back there.
Thank you and congratulations on your results. The question for you is, are there any sectors or governments that you would not take on? You wouldn't even try?
No.
Well, I hope so.
She's crazy.
No, I mean, look, certainly I'm quite pragmatic. I think there has to be a real chance, to do something, however ambitious that is. I don't believe in suicide missions.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to know if there are 1 or 2 examples where you see such a little chance that you wouldn't.
I did turn down a film recently which was about Russia. And I didn't feel had a particularly good chance of changing what it wanted to change.
There are 2 questions at the back, and then, yeah.
Thank you very much. Congratulations for this wonderful documentary, and you see how important it was to do it, because the result, at least Soko withdrew, and this is important. I would like to know about the financial matters, if you don't mind to talk about that. How did you finance the doc? And as well, how is your relationship with the government at the moment? And because you are really talking about a very important issue. And of course, the world is not perfect, but congratulations for what you did, because it's a first step. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Financing was actually quite difficult because the investigation was wholly secret, and so it was quite difficult to go to people and say, we need a large amount of money to make a film about something we can't tell you about. But we were very lucky, and the park itself already had quite a lot of allies and foundations, and partly this was the first time we went through Good Pitch. This was part of what Britdoc supported on, to say actually we're going to vouch for these filmmakers, and you should really get behind this film. And to some of the funders, we can't necessarily tell you why, but you should trust us. So that's another kind of huge tick in what Good Pitch can do for filmmakers. But essentially, the film was fully foundation funded. So, and actually, the impact campaign after the fact was also foundation funded. So, in the end, it was people that had an interest in these issues, either on the film side or on the foundation side, on conservation or human rights, that said, actually, a film may be the only chance that we can get to really push through on an issue we deeply care about.
And did any of those funders have any editorial control on your film?
Not a one.
Can you tell me, can we talk about money, about the amount of money you spent to make the movie? Is it something we can talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. And all of these questions, again, are in the impact report on the Britdoc website. But yeah, the film cost around $1 million. And the impact campaign also cost around $1 million.
We've got one question from the lady at the back, and then we're going to move on to our next filmmaker.
Thank you. As a filmmaker, I'm curious just to hear, just to piggyback off of what he was asking about your pre-production process, the point at which you first have the idea across your desk, how you were able to bring the partnerships on board, hearing earlier that often the Good Pitch process takes 6 to 8 months. When there is a project that requires an urgent response in order to include that aspect in the film, in the storytelling, especially, given that you had this pressure with Sokos taking over the park, I would imagine you wanted to get in there pretty quickly with a crew. What was that process like? Can you maybe share a little bit of the timeline and when funding came in and how did you actually get it started?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Actually, I came on board Virunga after the director had been on the ground for over a year, and actually met him through the Good Pitch process. So I had come in to talk about No Fire Zone, which you'll hear about later, and actually Beadie, you introduced me to the director and kind of match made us.
And when we met Orlando the first time, and he came and sat at the kitchen table at Britdoc and we had a coffee, and he said, I'm making a film about gorillas, because at the time that's what he was making. And he said, would Britdoc be interested? And I was like, not so much. That sounds really charming, but we don't fund natural history. And then he went on another shoot. And when he went on the next shoot, suddenly, the kind of story began to evolve. So it's a kind of, these projects are made over 3, 4, 5 years, and it's a journey with a filmmaker where, they begin on a journey, they're on a track, they have something, but they don't know necessarily what exactly it is, and then the story begins to evolve, and then hopefully, as a funder, and then, working in collaboration with other funders, you can bring people in quickly enough to keep them sustained, and then Good Pitch, can act as a catalyst, to kind of blow up the partnerships. But these things, they take place over time, and the story must just come as it comes.
Yeah, the process with Virunga was a relatively quick one because Soko was an urgent issue. But you're still talking about kind of 3-4 years in totality, and because you have to make sure that you're prepared to do it right. You can't rush it either.
Please grab Joe after we're finished and get more information and detail about the process, and hear about some of our other exploits with other films because they're brilliant, hilarious. A big round of applause. You're amazing, Joe. So our third film team, it gives me enormous pleasure to welcome these guys up from our school. Directors Mona and Nora. Incredible projects. You are so welcome, and please take it away.
Thank you, Beadie. Hi, I'm Mona. This is Virunga. Virunga will start out by talking a little bit about the film, and then we're going to go into detail about our little artisanal process doing advocacy around it.
Yes, because talking about our school, talking about our school, with a feature-length documentary follows 3 Roma children in a rural Transylvanian village who are among the pioneer participants in an initiative to integrate the ethnically segregating Romanian schools. When their school is desegregated, the 3 Roma kids, Alin, Benjamin, and Dana, set out for the city school in the center of the city, optimistic for education and the new friendship, even as funds earmarked for integration are questionably used to build a Roma-only school in their village. Their innocent optimism quickly sours when the children are met with low expectations and further isolation. Let's have a look on the trailer.
Nu știu că chiar așa, pe o parte, să te la mine, știți? Țigan. Romantă, țigan. Da, și ne-am zis așa, bravo, băiatul, e țigan. Bun. Am fost la mai multe școli. 4 clasa cu școala asta. Au fost mai ceva, acum e mai frumosă. Atunci au mâncat o câine, băiat, și la mine pe ea și au mâncat o câine. Au venit o macarau mare, că i-au dat 2 tancuri și au zburdat școala. La școala asta te învață să fii leniș. Dar la altă școală mai bine ca aici mai înveți, mai mergi, mai te joci.
So the film was shot over 4 years. We started in 2006 and we finished in 2010. And of course the story touches on issues ranging from institutionalized racism, public education, and the intractability of poverty, of course. We premiered in Tribeca Film Festival and in Vision du Réel, Agnon. And of course, we had the chance and the opportunity to make this topic visible in more than 60 festivals around the world.
So, this film basically came out of our shared interest in Roma rights. Miruna, actually, we were much younger at the time, had just done her thesis film on Roma in Romania. I was myself a human rights activist for much of my life, working on Roma issues. And we basically wanted to do a film that exposed what we knew, that rendered it humanly visible, gave it flesh to everything that we knew sort of theoretically. And we hope that this will sort of like break all sorts of barriers and do all sorts of stuff like change the world. Our director of photography, we're a very, very small team. It was always the three of us for 4 years going back to the same village until people sort of like started to shake their heads and think that we had lost our minds. And we're very, very nice and tolerant and accepting of these, you know, crazy three people that keep coming back for reasons that they could not really fathom. They thought, you know, we're a small place, what's the story here? So we were talking with our director of photography about what we wanted to do with the film early on. This is a sort of large, much larger than us, Transylvanian guy who was like, honey, you can't change the world with a film. I was like, you're lucky if you can change one person. And I realized at the time, even though my background was in activism, I was like, the guy's kind of right. And we also sort of knew in our heart of hearts that this was not going to be a popular subject. That we were going to have to do very, very, very targeted work with it. We can't do like this massive campaign for Roma rights around this film because nobody would be interested in it. It turned out, I mean, not even broadcasters who bought the film, some of them actually did not show it, even though they put money in it because they thought their audiences weren't ready for it. So this is basically what we were starting with. It's sort of a tragically unpopular topic in Europe, as many of us in this room unfortunately know. We knew that, so campaign, you know, large-scale campaigning, the kind of like outreach campaign was out, and all we could do was sort of very targeted advocacy work that was focusing on policymakers, on funders that gave money, development money, for Roma integration and specifically for education. And then whatever else happened around the film was icing on the cake because we knew that we had a very short window. In 2011 is when the film premiered. By 2015, something that was in Europe called the Decade of Roma Inclusion, that involved a lot of funders, a lot of European institutions, the World Bank in the US, the Open Society Foundation in the United States, was going to come to an end. And that was like it was a campaign to develop policy goals, very similar to the UN Millennium goals, if you know, but specifically targeting Roma. And we knew that a lot of decisions relating to funding, relating to policy making, were going to be made in various countries in Europe, but also at the level of European institutions during that brief period of time. So we went basically to where the money and the decision makers were. We were a little lucky because my own background in Roma advocacy, I kind of knew the players and we were able to penetrate relatively easily, but like we went very quickly to the European Parliament, for instance. We knew that we wanted the European Parliament and the European Commission to actually take a look at this film, and we didn't care how many people were going to be in that room. We cared who was going to be in that room. They filled the room eventually, but the important thing is that there were people who were on the right committees, who were making the right decisions, that were there, left shaking their heads, and hopefully it played into their decision-making processes. It's very hard to quantify, actually, the kind of impact that a film like this has on policy or, you know, bags of money and how they're monitored and distributed. The best that we could do is to make sure that there was an emotional impact, that there was an understanding of this particular situation that might carry over, that might be scaled up to the general understanding of the issue for these funders. We had screenings at the Council of Europe, the Fundamental Rights Agency, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the US Congress very early on, and we had people from the USAID, which is the main funding arm of the US government internationally. We had screenings at the World Bank. Those were interestingly closed screenings that we didn't have access to. Basically, we took whatever terms these institutions set for us were acceptable to us as long as they saw the film, actually. Because we believed very firmly that once they saw the film, they could actually understand how the money can be better used, better monitored, better allocated. We also tried to get the film before the relevant ministries of education. We managed to have a screening of, yes, there was a Romanian Minister of Education, at a time where there were Romania went through 6 ministers of education within a 2-year span. So that didn't do us very, very much good. We ended up getting, even though we got an official commitment from this minister to get the film into all the teacher training programs, that never happened because the guy was out of office in 2 months. So what we did is we caved through the back door using a lot of NGOs, using the equality body in Romania. Every country has one of these, and had the film distributed to actually teacher training programs that way. So it took a little bit of tenacity. It was the same with Hungary, where things got tougher and tougher with the Orban government. It was the same with the Czech Republic, where we had an initial opening from the Human Rights Office there, but the Ministry of Education went back and forth until we started using local NGOs to do the work that our institutional state actor partners were not necessarily gonna do. It became very clear after a while. So we had a lot of local NGOs in each country, strange coalitions, numbers of NGOs. Whoever wanted our film, we weren't precious about it. Whoever wanted our film could get it. We developed screening guides, translated them into local languages, made ourselves available in person, on Skype. Whoever wanted the film got it, and they got it for free. Because a lot of these organizations are organizations that don't have a lot of resources, but they have a lot of goodwill, and they have membership, or they have their own specific little advocacy goals on a local level, and it would be just a shame not to help them in any way, because that was part of what we intended to do with the film. We also had a few international partners, specifically Amnesty International. Again, we did not have a lot of control over how that happened. We worked with the London office, gave them the film, gave them a text-less version. They developed versions in Mandarin, in Bengali, in a lot of local languages in Europe, did whatever they wanted with it. And as necessary, we were there for the screenings to help, but very often we didn't need to be involved. Because these people actually know what they're doing much better than we would know for them. Miruna will talk just one more second about what the work that she did locally, because this is all actually about taking it locally. So, in Geneva.
Yes, of course, as Mona said, our strength was the fact that we were a small team, and we keep it that way. And we knew it was important to work in a very direct way on a local level and hyper-local level. So that's why we get in touch with NGOs here. I've been working with the NGOs, working on Roma topics. And as Mona said, it's very difficult to measure the impact of this kind of campaigning and working with. I've been following a lot of projection in Geneva, and also in some other cities, participating and talking directly with the teacher in teaching and training programs, because we understood that this is how the way we can be with that movie, that being there, answering to the questions of teachers, of kids in schools and everything. And we were really happy because last year we had the opportunity to work directly with the mayor of Geneva, Mr. Sami Canan, and we organized together, based on the work we've made also with the film, and of course the huge work of the NGOs here in Geneva, to organize an event around the Roma topic one day here on the Plaine de Plain Palais, and we were really happy to talk about that and to share our experience and to say that the most important thing when we talk about Roma is to organize events for and with Roma leaders, because the Roma leadership is really important, and this is how the mayor of Geneva organized this event, giving some voice to Roma leaders who came especially from Romania to participate at this day around the Roma event who took place in Geneva.
So I think that's about it. Are we?
We should open up to the room.
Yes, yes.
Let's have some questions from the room. Thank you so much. While people are collecting themselves and thinking of their brilliant, piercing questions for this team, while you were talking, I think it's worth saying out loud that there isn't a single way to do this work. If you are a filmmaker who is lucky enough to be making a beautiful social justice documentary and you become interested in the idea of developing an outreach or an impact campaign, there is no one way to do that or execute that. Many filmmakers, often the director, can get to the end of a process and go, do you know what, it's awesome, this work is going to happen with the film, but I don't want to be involved. I'm going to hand it off, maybe to an NGO partner who shares the same values, who's going to take the film and run with it, maybe to an impact producer. And there's a model like Pam and Paco's where their entire organization both does and delivers not only the film, but then delivers these multi-year complex campaigns. So my point is there isn't one way. And a lot of filmmakers, when they hear these fantastic stories, they go, it's not for me, I couldn't do it. And I guess I just want to say that's okay. That is totally okay, because there are many people that do, whether they be expert partner organizations or other experts like impact producers that you can bring into your team to help devise and deliver these kind of incredibly sophisticated campaigns.
And it's like we all know from our work, like each issue and each campaign is its own animal, and you have to sort of reinvent the wheel according to like what you can do, how you can best do it, and what is the best way to have impact. And also sometimes, how much funding you have. Because not everybody gets as much. We were very, very lucky because we got funding from Britdoc, we got funding from the Sundance Documentary Fund, and also from some of our issue funders, the Open Society Foundation, for outreach. But we didn't get a lot of money. We didn't need a lot of money either. And we worked with what we could do and what we get. What our goals actually were. We sort of like kept the goal constantly in our lens.
Deeply pragmatic, please. If you could say who you are.
Atlante Moquette from Giving Women. I think it's fascinating to hear your story because clearly the topic is not a popular one. It's not something that people grab onto. It's much easier to talk about Virunga, and it's a big subject. So I would like to congratulate you for being persistent. My question is, were you able to really get policy changes that would be implemented in a very tangible way? Because awareness is one thing, but changing the system is another.
Absolutely. It's look, a film very rarely does that. There are very few cases when that happens. That what gets policy changes implemented is consistent work, persistent work over decades by various actors, activists, and the film can be part of that. I would not want to overclaim what we did. I do know that as a result of the work of a lot of people, and we hope that our film was a small part of that, there is much more care to how resources are allocated for Roma education. There is much more awareness of the insidious nature of segregation in education for Roma. I could overclaim a lot of stuff. I don't want to, because I think that wouldn't be fair. I don't know even how to measure the accuracy of something like this. I know all the work that came before us. I know all the work that happened afterwards. And I hope that our film, we thought of our film as sort of helpful in that conversation. But I can't tell you, I would not want to tell you this film led to this decision, because that would not be fair to a lot of the people that are involved in this work.
And I'd say if you're interested in exploring case studies, and there are lots, the great news is now that there is an enormous amount of impact measurement and evaluation which is going on, and wonderful case studies that have been that are being shared by the community, within the community, for anyone who wants to work with film. And we have a library of them. If you go to impactguide.org, it's a resource that's been sort of created for the field, by the field, and anyone who wants to work to make impact with film. In the library section, and there's lots of good stuff in there, but if you go into the library specifically, there's over 25, nearly 30 major impact case studies looking at very, very different kinds of films, working in a range of topics, in a range of locations and different ways. So hopefully you can flesh out, some of those more ideas and principles. Yes, the lady there.
Hello, Virginia Ruan. I'm with the Oak Foundation. I just am curious if you followed up with the children themselves and how they're doing, and if you have any plans for any future films about them themselves or anything else around the Roma community.
Virunga was the most recent visitor of Târgu, so she can...
So yes, sorry for this. Yes, I've been to Târgu. It was last year in the summer, and I had the opportunity to meet all the characters in the documentary. Not a lot of change for Dana in Dana's life. Benjamin, one of the characters, he is a dad. He has a little son. And Aline is going from time to time to France. So his family is in France. They are going there and they are coming back. They are building their home. And they have water, who was in their home, because we didn't have that before we left, when we've been there for the last shot. So there were a lot of things that changed, but not a lot. This is what's happened, because every time we were just calling there during the shot, and everybody said, no, nothing changed, and every time we were like, we have to go back, because we know that there are a lot of changes, and we went back to Romania and we saw that there were a lot of things changing. So yes, 5 years after the end of the movie, when the movie was released, I almost didn't recognize Aline, yes, but we are getting in touch, we are keeping in touch. It's long-term involvement with them, their families, and all the people, not only the characters, also the people, the authorities in Târgu.
What's striking for us is sort of the difference in opportunity between the Roma and the non-Roma. There's one character, a wonderful Romanian boy in the film, Dan Boga, who is our one non-Roma kid subject, and while the other Roma kids never had any opportunities, Dan Boga is now a model. I mean a model.
A real one.
You have to see, we're friends on Facebook. It's a thing. And even though, we don't know how far he's going to go was that, but he clearly had a lot more opportunities than the Roma kids. And education is certainly part of that, just the ability to read a contract and sign it. It becomes as simple as that.
Thank you. Thank you all for the model and sharing your practice, and really a huge round of applause for this fantastic team. So I hope that has given, fleshed out in this model when we talk about filmmakers, devising, strategizing social justice campaigns alongside their film and then delivering them. I hope you're beginning to get a taste now of what that means. But let's just flip to the other side of the perspective. It is not straightforward by any means for an NGO or a foundation or a brand or any other kind of entity to partner easily and immediately with a documentary filmmaker. Let's just put ourselves in their shoes for a minute. A filmmaker rings up and says, I've got a fantastic film about this incredibly key subject, which is on mission with your goals. can I apply for some funding? For an awful lot of organisations, the first answer is, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how we can even work with each other. And I just wanted to share with you a little bit some data, because we talked to a lot of funders and partners who work with filmmakers. These are non-traditional, so not non-broadcasters, non-distributors, to see their experience. Are the slides up now? Can I access them? Awesome. I'm just going to whiz through this. I'm going to come back to that. So, from the perspective of a potential non-traditional partner, here's the perception. Independent docs are pretty hot, we have a situation globally where TV's not covering many international stories in depth anymore. There is a crisis in print journalism. These independent filmmakers are seen as being brave, committed, and their independence is highly prized. The public is increasingly valuing the authentic, the real. They can tell the difference when they're being sold something, when they're watching an EPK versus a fantastic, narrative. And documentaries are rising as a cultural form. They are getting better and better, and the ambition and strategy of filmmakers is getting smarter and smarter. So this is the perception from the other side of the fence. And there is this conversation. I mean, many of you go, yeah, I know this, but really think about it and value it. Docs have a unique ability to communicate with people in a different way than maybe news or research, or maybe if you're a foundation and you're thinking about how do I create cultural shift around a given issue, what are my options? Well, documentary suddenly becomes a really interesting tool in the toolbox alongside all of the other techniques that I have. This magical combination of art and journalism, using story and narrative to reach hearts as well as minds. This is the alchemy of great storytelling. And the other thing is, and gets it down to the nuts and bolts, which I think you're beginning to hear from these three cases, films are unbelievably useful. You can do so much with them. The self-evident thing that they're a natural magnet for events and discussion and conversation. But actually think about all the myriad other kinds of form of content, of apps. Think of all what we've heard today, the study guides, all the other purposes and repurposing. You have your big feature doc, and we think of it as a big, it was almost like the coat hanger off which all these other form and content can hang. And this, for me, is the million-dollar piece. That the making of a film, the sharing of the film, the devising, the delivering of an impact campaign is a profoundly collaborative exercise. You've heard here in all these three very different cases, filmmakers describing how they've built, major coalitions, of all different kinds, from the most micro community organizations right the way up to governmental leaders or celebrity, to come together to partner around this film. So we did a survey of some of the foundation funders and asked them, why do you actually support film as a strategic tool? And so these are all funders for whom film is not their core purpose, all right? So this is, they're issue-based, or they have a set of priorities. So we asked the question, why did you get involved with a movie? And these are the reasons, and it's interesting. By far and large, the recognition that film is a really effective empathy-generating machine. And actually, it's a really cost-effective tool for raising awareness within society. If you think about the cost of an average, major advertising campaign, that you might run, or public, or for a government agency, I mean, a doc is cheap. It's cheap, it's small change in comparison. And there's also this understanding that it actually can be a highly effective lobbying tool, and etc. You can see the breakdown there, but I just thought that was interesting to have a look at. But it's not all easy. I have to tell you, many of these filmmakers, when they pick up the phone for the first time to talk to a new partner, there's a lot of head scratching on the other end of the line. Well, it's not our job to fund media. Don't you understand? We fund women's issues, or we fund environmental topics. We don't fund film. If a foundation doesn't have a specific funding pot, you're really asking a program officer to bend themselves in a pretzel shape to figure out how they might be able to help, even if it looks like a really good idea. A lot of them are deeply nervous of working with filmmakers, with media makers. They're seen as, it's complicated, it's unpredictable, the filming process, how long is it going to take, when's it going to deliver, what will the message really be? These are really worrying things if you're a foundation. Many have their own internal film and PR units. They kind of go, well, we do this stuff already. We make films about our programs. Why do we need to collaborate with an independent filmmaker? What value is that going to bring us? Now, I think everyone in this room probably does know exactly what the difference is between, an EPK versus a kind of long-form independent narrative documentary with all its light and shade and greyness and complexity. But still, it's a question. And then finally, this question about, well, actually, practically speaking, whether I have money or I don't have money, how could we collaborate? But I just want to fire up very quickly 2 lists about, this is just what I could think of last night, different ways that people and organizations can collaborate with filmmakers. Actually, during the production process, there are a bunch of ways that you could get together with a film team and provide, assistance, material assistance, expertise, access to ideas, to people, and to assist them. And I would say while, preserving the integrity, the intentionality of the filmmaker. And when we get into, once the film is completed, the list just escalates a million other ways, because there's so many ways that you can aid and abet and help share and get that film to strategic audiences. The list is as long as your imagination, and I ran out about here last night. It was very late. But you get the idea, right? And that's the thing. This is a two-way exercise. It's about sharing an idea with filmmakers to encourage them to ask for different kinds of support. And likewise, feeding the imagination of some of foundations and campaign organizations and saying, actually, there's a way where we can positively collaborate together and that it's mutually beneficial. So, that's my end slide. This is from the wonderful Mexican organization, NGOs. I'm so gutted we never thought of making like a mat. I mean, look at that, it's beautiful. NGOs we trust. I'm a believer, I'm a passionate believer in this form, in the power of this form. And I want to invite up now a brilliant group of people who, they represent the potential partners, right? They represent the other side of the conversation. Foundations, NGOs, campaigners, and folks who can talk about the perspective from corporates as well, to talk about what it feels like, what their experience has been, and what the challenges and opportunities are for them. So if I could welcome up my panel, please, onto the stage. Thank you very much. So we've got Cara returning, and we've got Nico and Peter and Florence. Thank you so much. I'm going to perch on the end. I've got an end. Come, please, Florence, you sit in the middle. No, you sit in the middle. You're going to make me sit in the middle. Okay. All right. You have to help me be the timekeeper then.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, we got microphones easy within grab reach. Why don't you guys share that one, and you take that. Would you like to start just by introducing yourself so we can whiz around so everyone knows who's who? Please.
Hi, my name is Peter Splinter. I'm the representative of Amnesty International in Geneva.
Wonderful.
Hello, I'm Nico Daswani. I run the arts and culture for the World Economic Forum.
Great. I'm Cara Mertes. I run JustFilms out of the Ford Foundation in New York.
I'm Florence Dacier. I'm the director of the Issues Affecting Women program of the Oak Foundation.
Thank you. Please, you can keep the mic there. Yeah. So thank you all for agreeing to kind of have this post-mortem conversation. Now you've heard there's 3 fantastic film teams describe very different kinds of practice and ambition, and I hope that would be, provide interesting points of reference. But all of you, I believe, one way or another, have worked with film, documentary film, and indeed other kinds of media. And I'm curious to know, and really, we want honesty here, otherwise this conversation means nothing. Both what excites you about working with the form, what the potential is in the work, what the potential that you see, but also the challenges and the things that you feel that you either need, the things that you're worrying about and philosophizing about that your organization is. So that is the central question for us. And Cara, can I start with you? Sorry to put you on the hot seat. You gave such a beautiful introduction and a kind of really call to arms for the meaning of this work and the profundity of it. But can I take you back to brass tacks and what does film do for Ford?
Yeah.
I mean, Ford is not a film funding, or that's not what it exists to do. So I just wondered if you could restate what the ambitions of that foundation are, what its mission is, and why you have such a profound and significant film program.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for earlier, all the filmmakers. You did a tremendous job presenting all of the different dimensions of how film actually operates in this kind of ecosystem that we're proposing to people. And I'll say, you know, many of you will know Ford Foundation in the U.S. is the second biggest foundation, and started and was really driven by the charge immediately after the UN of fostering human dignity, broadly speaking. And very early on, they decided that arts and culture was a very integral part of what they were doing in both political change and also using economic tools and mechanisms. But arts and culture and humanities was a very lively portion of this. So they started in the late 40s, but by the early 50s, they were already starting to imagine public television in the United States as an infrastructure. And of course, in Europe and in the UK, public television already had a system of taxation and had been for 2 decades being built. In the US, it was commercialized. And so we didn't see a public media infrastructure except for a private foundation beginning to imagine it and then taking that model and bringing it to government. And so there's a very long history of the media funding and then the film funding, with the idea that Ford would also fund content that would then be used to you know, populate this public media infrastructure. And so you began to see early Ford program officers identifying early filmmakers and independent documentary filmmakers and labs, actually, to develop new forms, video art, for instance, experimentation. All of this was happening in the early 70s, funded by the Ford Foundation, as well as funding independent documentary very early on. So we see the idea of a civic discourse and a public role for funding storytelling twinned at the foundation from the late 60s all on to today. And so I think that for this room is probably an important thing to think about. It's not an answer to a plea of a charismatic filmmaker. It's actually something that's quite systemic in terms of North America and what the foundation thought was important to bring to a public as opposed to, say, a corporate or a commercial needs. So that gave rise to a kind of counter narrative, and actually the filmmakers became the producers of a sort of counter narrative or a critical narrative within the context of North American media. And we see this tradition continuing today, and I found it really interesting that some of the questions actually picked up immediately on where is the role of the counter narrative. And in a context like we have today, sort of 40, 50 years on, how do we begin to look at the contradictions that elicits for us, if in particular we're a social justice NGO or a foundation? How do we deal with those contradictions? Because they are not anymore as clean-cut as they used to be, and the ground has shifted. So who's a friend and who's a foe? How you actually create mechanism for change-making, and then how does storytelling fit into that? Editorial independence, you brought up so beautifully, is still a very key question. So I'll just skip to moving to, so I came out of public television, public media, as you can tell, a sort of student of that, and then did a lot of artist support at Sundance. And now coming to the Ford Foundation, I'd say that people are enormously interested in terms of the program officer, the level of the staff is enormously interested and also somewhat experienced at using media and using particularly audiovisual media, filmmaking. And I will say we're also looking at interactive media and virtual reality as well now. And not just as a tool, but as a process in and of itself that gives voice, that actually creates a notion of free expression and creative expression as a sort of a human right and a birthright, if you will. And so working inside the foundation, it's relatively easy to make the case for why a particular film. Where it gets, where we have to spend a tremendous amount of time is internal dialogue, communication, speaking the same language. And then as we move one level out, which is to our grantee network, which is vast, that is the level where we need to have a lot of conversation, a lot of alignment, a lot of definition. And so for us, a lot of my time is spent on that kind of educating internally, and then first circle out to the to the grantees, and then to their networks. And I'll stop there with that.
It is my contention that Europe is that the money for serious long-form independent journalism, filmmaking, is going to continue to drain away. And it is my contention that in the next decade, we must see 2 or 3 foundations make a commitment the size of Ford's, within Europe to support this work. Because I think it's either that or it disappears from the public sphere, and that's a little challenge to the room. Like, how do we make that so? But it's also a challenge to Cara Mertes. How do we inspire, the leading, major foundations in the European sector to step up and help to fill that role and provide that support for independent storytellers?
2 quick answers to that, because I know people have heard from me and want to hear from all of you. To put a number on the Ford commitment, I would say it's between $12 and $20 million annually that goes specifically into media projects, film projects. That does not include journalism. If we include investigative journalism, then we're looking upwards, and this is across all 10 offices, not just the New York office. So we're probably looking at between $20 and $30 million all told, if you include every initiative and every office across Ford. So that gives you a sense of the scope. And Ford annually grants out about $500 million a year globally. So you can see the relative, it's less than 10% of the entire budget. But it is still a significant amount of money if you're thinking in terms of the independent world. And in answer to your second question, I think not going in with a predetermined template is one of the first steps. Going in to understand what the needs are and what the possibilities are. And then hearing what the questions are. This is, I think, always the first step in the best kind of transition to a new mode of working. And so if people are worried about working with cultural strategies, and specifically films, then you understand the worries first, and then you find points of alignment. And so I think this is a perfect opportunity to have this discussion here today. And then models, obviously, examples. Things that work, things that didn't work, so that you can begin to refine, adapt, and prototype for your own needs and your own circumstances.
Florence, can I bring you in? It's the perfect segue. No pressure on Oak Foundation. I'm not suggesting
I can hear that.
Right here and now you need to commit to a no, anyway. No, in all seriousness, I'd love to hear a little bit about the Foundation's experience with film, good and bad, or good and indifferent, and maybe some questions and reflections about how, having also heard this conversation this morning, maybe how you see the conversation shifting.
So I think we are clearly on the other side of the spectrum from Ford Foundation. We don't have any specific program or funding dedicated to audiovisual production. That said, we have probably funded around a dozen of film, but not only funded film, but funded campaign around the films. And so typically the Virunga film Oak funded conservation organization that were doing the campaigning around. So I think that part is really very important too, as we could see. A film in itself is not a campaign. And so the results, I would say, when it works well, and when you have all these elements into place, a good film, messages that are really aligned with what the organization or the advocacy field around this issue is really trying to promote, a resonance, so the target audience is really well reached with the film and with the campaign. I think it's an incredible tool and it's very powerful. When it doesn't work and you don't have all these elements into place, I think it's often a waste of money. And we have that experience too. Now, again, going back to the foundation, I think we work on social issues, social justice and environmental issues. And clearly, the type of film that you are supporting and that we have seen here would really be exactly the type of film we could support. Now, the choice also we have to make, again, is we have a given budget. Our budget is for the women's program this year is 16 million when you compare to the budget you have. So it's a very difficult choice. I mean, what do you fund when you know that we are one of the very few women's rights globally funder? Where do you put this money? And you invest in a film because you believe that what will come out of this is actually, advancing women's rights on, certain issues that we can have, that have been defined as the strategy of the program, or do you fund the organizations that are doing the work on the ground? And I think this is the sort of choices we have to make, and we probably tend to be the ones who say, you know, we are building the infrastructure of the women's movements on the ground, so the organizations that are really doing the work, and tend to say, okay, hopefully there's other funders that will be funding this other part, such as Ford Foundation. But maybe it's not always the right strategy, and we should consider actually also sometimes looking at opportunities where really a film can bring a message, can build a constituency, a movement, can actually change the definition of a topic, or really raise awareness about something. And we have, you know, a lot of examples in the work we do where clearly a film could do this. Now, again, it would be finding the right message, the right film producer, a set of organizations around that would really use it. Just as the example of Pam and Paco are really, it's amazing. I mean, clearly reaching grassroots women that can see, you know, how their life could be transformed with some of the tools that can be brought to them, such as financial inclusion is really essential. So I think I have many more questions than I have responses to this. I think clearly the role of Britdoc and other connectors, bridge builder in this ecosystem is really essential. Again, because we don't have the professional expertise you have. I mean, Ford is really very lucky to have you and to drive this. I mean, the first film and requests that we have received as a team, we are completely, this is not my field. I don't know how to make a due diligence.
So what do you do? I mean, if someone, you know, meets you outside and hands you a disc, like, what do you do next?
Actually, we didn't come to you, which now I know this is what I would do next time, but, you know, again, you learn. I think the philanthropic field is also becoming much more professional, so there's a lot of things, you know, that are existing now, which is helping foundation, you know, make the right choices and having the right tools and approaches to reach their strategy. And so typically this is, you know, this is one. So what we do is actually questioning the filmmaker, seeing if they are connected to the organization or the partners we have in the field, sort of looking at the messages and, you know, does it align really with how we would frame those issues or the problematic that are raised. But I guess I think we are not, you know, making a due diligence about the budget of a film and, you know, what are the chances of this film to be broadcasted in the right channels and, you know, what does it mean is clearly not our skills. And so, again, that requires a kind of building our capacities or connecting with the people who can have these capacities and help us make those choices.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your candidness. Could we have the house lights up a little bit, just in case if people have got a burning interjection from the room? I'd love to stay connected to the audience. Has anyone got like a question already for Cara and Florence? Because we're going to move away from foundation land in a minute. Any questions there? I can't see any hands. Okay. Well, and by the way, from our perspective, you know, thank you for agreeing to have this conversation. And I know the experience hasn't been straightforward, and you know, on behalf of, you know, the other filmmakers, any way that we can also help, you know, help that process as you begin to navigate how to make work and what work to support. You know, we're at your service. We're all at your service, and all the film teams you've met today too are brilliant. Have brilliant nous.
I'll just add, punctuate what you've said. There is a
drama. Wow.
Better be important. Yeah, very good. I always carry a soundtrack with me wherever I go. Very good skills.
So melodramatic.
Thank you. I was going to say that when a foundation who is well known on an issue and has tremendous expertise in the way that the Oak Foundation does, it is not incumbent upon you to fully fund a project. Even 10,000, 5,000, even small grants that signal to the field that you think this is important and that you are willing to take some leadership in investing. And I'm not saying just to you, it's actually to the room, that small amounts because of your expertise will make a big difference in the world. And many of the independent filmmakers that work, particularly in North America, and the Europeans are learning how to do this, you make a patchwork of funding. And so we know that you're not going to get funding from one place, but key organizations or foundations that have a track record, this is very important and can go very far. So this is one thing to know, that you don't, that foundations don't have to carry the complete burden of doing this kind of work. And then the second thing is that, you know, across the world, as I travel talking about this, foundations, NGOs, almost every sector is seeing the power of narrative shift change. The idea of shifting discourse around key issues as a fundamental strategy in terms of making change for, you know, more progressive outcomes. And so there is a discussion going on in many foundations and many circles that can be tapped into, that we're thinking about how to offer expertise if you don't have either the capacity or interest in building capacity inside your organization. There will be outside organizations that one can tap into, because this conversation is happening everywhere now. Inside strategies, so for instance, within Ford Foundation now, in the work on women and girls' rights, they have a whole strand of discussion where they're thinking about shifting the narrative around some of these issues, which sits outside but is related to the film portfolio. Do you see what I mean? This is how ingrained and interwoven these discussions are becoming, and we see this happening across other foundations as well.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Nico, if I may. Yes. And I wondered whether you'd tell us, as Cara explained, JustFilms supports a myriad of different kinds of media projects, and I'd love to hear about the VR that you've been involved with.
Yeah, thank you. I'm waiting for my own gong, or there's something that's happening, but okay, maybe next time, maybe if I'm a keynote. But we're an international organization in the World Economic Forum. Can I just ask how many of you have heard of the World Economic Forum or Davos?
Come on, this is
okay, no, just okay. Just I don't have to explain too much of the context, but we have an opportunity in Davos, which is the forum's main event, every January, in a concentrated amount of time, in a very small place. We have a lot of, essentially, the most influential people in the world, from business, from politics, from civil society, academia, artists, religious leaders. And with arts and culture, we think about how can we, in a way, contribute to the dialogue, be part of the dialogue, but also how can we intervene? How can we, through new ways and new modes of expression, contribute just a different understanding of the topics, create a certain sense of empathy, whether it's raising awareness or actually leading people to action. So we became acquainted about a year ago with virtual reality and with the potential of virtual reality. We'd presented virtual reality in the past more as a technology and just interesting in and of itself as to what it was. But we saw the potential of VR to capture people's attention physically and literally. I mean, you cannot multitask while you're watching virtual reality. And here we have a community of people who come, who are very busy, who have a lot on their agendas, yet who seek out experiences and increasingly seek out immersive experiences. And so we reached out to an artist called Lynette Walworth. She's an artist with whom we've worked in the past. She's from Australia. She's an extraordinary artist, just a beautiful spirit. And she, we asked Lynette, we said, would you make a virtual reality film that we could present for this purpose, for this audience, and that we could use very strategically as an opportunity to just shift shift the mind on certain topics. And so we spent several weeks discussing what was of institutional priority for the forum and what she was passionate about, and also the context of what was happening. This was last year, so COP21 was on the agenda, and we thought, could we do something that relates broadly to climate, resource use, and sustainability? And those were essentially the parameters we gave Lynette. We didn't intervene into the creative process beyond that, after we sort of were aligned on the idea that the reason for making this was really to have that impact. And so Lynette really made this work with the Davos audience in mind. And in the course of a few months, and she raised the money, raised the budget, made an extraordinary film. I think that by opening up that possibility, I think a lot of other partners got excited. Right, Cara? I think just the idea that this work would be presented for world leaders and that it might have an impact really influenced I think a lot of folks. And so it was a snowballing effect. And so this film, which Lynette produced, but having the forum as an anchor and as the commitment that we were going to present this, I think really helped to build that momentum. And so we presented the film. And it then went to Sundance. It's going to be, it continues to basically go across the world. I think it was just at Ford, at the Ford offices, where the top leadership of Ford saw it there. And for us, it was an extraordinary experience. It was right in the middle of the Congress Center. I have a few images I can show you in a minute. And so we're very strategic. What we said to Lynette is, we will trust you with this work, and we hope that you will trust us with the respect we give you with how we present this work. Because, of course, with VR, as in with any other media, but VR perhaps in particular, because it's such a new medium, we still don't quite know how to present it in a way that's useful or intentional. And so we spend as much time, or perhaps as much time as she did making the film, in really strategizing and building the networks in-house to think, how can we bring this to life in a way that actually is going to have the intended outcome that we want it to have? And so we created a virtual reality space where 15 people at a time could do it, and this was just full throughout. And these are ministers, heads of major corporations, NGOs, and others who saw the film. And we also knew that this film, which I just mentioned, takes place in the Western Australian desert. It follows the story of Ngari Morgan, an indigenous man from the Martu community, and his experience in the 50s of a nuclear test that was made by the British government, nuclear test in the desert while he was just walking and not knowing what that was. And the film is an investigation of the impact of that nuclear test on that community. And to lead us in a reflection about, as we search for progress and as we seek the latest science and technology, to think about the unintended consequences of our thirst for progress, to think about what we might learn from indigenous wisdom for how to care for the planet and future generations. So we positioned the film in Davos as part of a sort of as part of the climate agenda, if you want to put it that way, and resource use agenda, where people know the statistics. We almost all agree on the issue, but there's a sort of a barrier to action, or COP21 is perhaps one achievement. But here with the business community, we thought we need to find opportunities for people to be moved that extra bit. And we knew how important it would be to bring Ngari Morgan, who had never been out of Australia, let alone his desert. And so we made a passport, made that happen, and we knew that we had to bring his family in order for him to have a support system. And so we brought his wife, Nola, and his grandson, Curtis. And he had been wanting to tell this story his entire life and build that relationship with Lynette, and he understood the significance of what it would mean to bring this story through virtual reality so people could actually virtually go into his land and understand his experience, and what it would mean then for the people in Davos to receive him conversely and have that exchange. And so Ngari was part of dialogues. And so the impact, I think, has been huge on his community. He talks a lot about how the community is sees almost a sort of the closure of a story that had been wanting to be told for over 70 years. And then there's some tangible impacts. For example, in the next couple of months, the film will be shown at the Test Ban Treaty Organization, where this film will go onto the heads of the member states who have not yet signed the treaty. So it's interesting to see how non-arts organizations are also thinking, oh well, we could maybe use this as a tool, even though the film itself, is not didactic, it's not prescriptive. It is an art piece, but it's really meant to elicit that kind of emotion. I'll just rifle through a couple of images just very quickly, just to give some context. I guess everybody does know about Davos, but I just wanted to give a context. It's a small place, 2 hours. It's hard to get to. It's cold. People are jet lagged, and they don't have their staff around them. So there's really quite an opportunity to influence people and influence decision makers because they're out of their comfort zone. So these are sort of kind of the types of interactions that happen in Davos. Just to give you a context at where the VR was placed, we have televised panels, we have performances, we have talks with business leaders, religious leaders, etc., on values and the 21st century. workshop settings. This is Shamino Becino, a filmmaker presenting some of her latest work. And this is the actual VR space that we created. And so it's quite it's sort of a choreography for the 21st century to see all these people moving around with these headsets. But we created, we were very intentional as to how we created a space where people, there's a backdrop of the desert. So we really wanted to show respect to the work and make the environment in which the work was going to be presented as powerful as possible. There's Nari with Lynette, Nari presenting the film. And he's dressed, when I first met him, he was in that space, and his wife, Nola, was putting on her third pair of socks, because it's obviously the first time outside of the desert. So it was quite an experience. And some unusual guests, like will.i.am, coming in and being very, very moved and looking at potential partnerships. This is how we presented it, just to show you how serious we were about this. And this is the panel where we had a collective viewing, preceded and followed by a panel discussion, where people watched the film. And Nari had an opportunity to address world leaders, and that's Nari back in his comfort zone. Back in his comfort zone. Yeah.
So I kind of have a what is it? Is it $1 million question? Maybe it is. I mean, you heard earlier in the room there was a healthy degree of question and even maybe cynicism, maybe anxiety about what does it mean for a filmmaker to perhaps collaborate with a foundation, or an NGO. Well, if you think there's anxiety around that, then the idea of a collaboration with a brand or a corporation will bring most filmmakers out in a cold sweat. It's almost impossible sort of to imagine what could that look like? How could it be positive? How could my work be taken seriously? And I'm laying it on strong, but just to make the point, I know this will be a kind of palpable fear in the room. And yet in the same time that is true, I was, when you and I were emailing last week, and I was thinking about some of the examples where, not just where, and the most common way that filmmakers might interact with a corporation is when they're the subject of a film, and often the villainous subject of a film, whether it be Ahsoka or SeaWorld, so there's this classic power dynamic of the filmmaker speaking truth to power to kind of the corporation. But of course, it's not so straightforward. And I was reflecting when we emailed back and forth on, for example, when we released the impact report of Citizen4 last week, the most concrete consequences, the most concrete effects so far of that movie have happened in major technology corporations who've stood up against the government and against the security agencies around the world and are defending the public's rights to privacy. And I thought, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, talk about unlikely allies. We've touched on that. That word has come up many, many times today. And it did make me think I think we maybe need to get over ourselves a little bit. I'm saying we as the film community. And think a little more deeply and clearly about what the potential there is to work together. And my $1 million question to you, as somebody who, you're working with, leaders, major political leaders, corporate leaders, what is your advice? What is your instinct? What is the most strategic and effective way to approach such a person, such an entity, with a proposition if you're one of these teams?
Yes, it's a good question. It is a $1 million question, and I think there's this idea that there's a fence. We've talked about this before, even the terminology of us and them, and certainly as a forum, as an international organization, we think of what we do as a platform. So we're bringing these different leaders, and we're trying to help provide an opportunity for these collaborations to happen. So that's why you have business, you have policy, you've got religious leaders, artists, etc. I think in terms of the corporate world, you can sense, it's palpable across the world, that the trust in business and in politics is perhaps at an all-time low right now. And so there's an opportunity, there's some soul-searching in the corporate world. At the forum, we talk about corporate citizenship, being active and engaged parts of society as a corporation, and what does that mean, and how do you do that, and how do you go beyond just corporate social responsibility to actually being a corporate citizen. And so what I see when I talk to folks from the business world is that there's just a lot of desire for authenticity. There's a lot of desire. There's also, the 24-hour news cycle, the split attention, and people have to work within that to grab people's attention and customers. But there is a desire for authenticity. There's a desire for legacy. A lot of the people that we have who are major CEOs think about, what is my role as a major CEO in the 150 or 200,000 people who work for me and their families. And I think it's perhaps changing the debate about defense and actually seeing and identifying which of the corporations or which of the corporate partners you as a filmmaker feel comfortable going out to because you feel like they have a good track record and you feel like they might be open to a suggestion. And then conversely, I think what we find is more and more from the folks from the corporate world who are intrigued, who are looking at. Virtual reality is a case in point. Everybody is doing VR right now, not really quite knowing why or how, but there's a lot of desire to do things. And so as there is content that is true, that speaks truth to power, that is authentic, I think more voices are heard in that case. But I think it's a process, and I think platforms like the Forum, like Skoll, like others, when these corporate leaders see the potential of the technology, of course they're leaders too, so they're also thinking, how can I use this technology? How can we use it for my own team and my own staff? But how does this increase our corporate citizenship to be using these technologies not just as a showcase of the latest technology, but also in terms of how we can use a certain kind of empathy and what are the initiatives out there that exist? And the Forum is one of those platforms where people seek out those kinds of collaborations.
And to that point, I'd say that when I look back over the kind of case studies that have emerged from the last 10 years, it was striking the one or two, quite radical examples where the right film got put in front of the right CEO at the right moment, and they were able to enact decisions overnight because of their authority and make national, international decisions, a change in policy overnight because they've reacted personally and unequivocally to a narrative that's presented. And, there's a case for saying some of those were lucky. There's a case for those, that it was the good fortune of a film team who maybe were super well connected and therefore could bring together, the most effective high-level convenings. But all I'll say is it's totally possible, and we've seen it happen. And I guess I'd urge the film teams in the room who are contemplating what does that mean, how could it work, but there is example. I've got a hand stretching up into the sky there. He wants to say something.
Hi, yes, Nicole Lazari. I have a question actually just for you about that one point you just expressed. As a citizen of the world, would you prefer that your leaders make a decision on evidence-based science or an emotional reaction to a piece of art? I say this as someone who loves documentaries and loves the power of empathy, but at times maybe that power of empathy needs to be expressed and taken on by the audience, but then processed in light of global situations or relationships.
I'm not sure it's an either or, but I hand over to Cara.
Well, I would just say that, what we've struggled with in the U.S. is that evidence-based science had sort of a 20-year complete, with climate change, didn't work. And it didn't work because there was actually a lot of questioning at the hearts and minds level, fear-based questioning. And so relying just on evidence-based science, I think, is the thing that we're saying is what doesn't always work. Science can't always speak for itself. In a society like today's, when the changes that are required are so drastic and actually reformulate economic equations and political equations to such an extent that they are just rejected. And so in that sense, science didn't work. It has to be together with, I think, and that's the art and journalism piece that we were talking about. If you put science in the context of an artful story, for instance, or you surround the story with science. So for instance, Collisions, the virtual reality piece, you could watch that and experience it and be in that space with those people. And then the idea of having evidence and science come to you after that, you would be well prepared to receive it and understand it and do something different.
It's a wonderful question, though. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I've got one more there, and then we're going to hear from Peter.
Sorry, Antonella Notari from the Humanity Foundation. Just to follow up on this point, I mean, I can definitely see that a corporate leader could be influenced by a moving, interesting, whatever film. But from there to see that a corporation or a corporate leader would fund an independently produced documentary on something that would question these corporations' practices, that's a completely different story.
I agree, it's a huge leap. And so far of the cases that I could think of, and I don't have an exhaustive knowledge, the case studies I could think of are where corporates have really positively got involved is once the film is done. So it's about watching the finished movie and saying, okay, now how can we back this? You know, and how can we, which is profound, potentially.
Beadie, can I just say one more thing, just to go back to your point very quickly on overnight? And I think there needs to be, from the point of funders and international organizations like us and filmmakers, the understanding that if there isn't a change overnight, that's okay. It doesn't mean it's failure. I think that if a film changes something overnight, it has to have been part of a continuum. It has to have been part of a certain kind of trajectory of the issue, and it has fit in to a certain moment where people have said, you know what, enough is enough, or absolutely this is the kind of angle we hadn't had. And so I think we need to all have the courage to say, the results might be in the long run, some of them might be quick wins, but these issues are complicated, and the results might end up being in the long run, and it's okay to support these works because we trust in the authenticity with how they were made and the intention with which they were made, and we're putting into place the mechanisms to try to have as much impact as possible.
And to that point, I guess I'm acknowledging that actually we have seen corporate leadership, we have seen real corporate leadership in a way that oftentimes we haven't seen political leadership. And I guess that's the point. And it was certainly a surprise to me in this body of work over this period of time. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. We're going to jump to Peter, he's our campaign master. You are an extraordinary role at Amnesty with actually an extraordinary legacy of working with lots of films. I'm incredibly curious to know, given the profundity and depth and range of your work, really how film has been useful for you.
Thank you, Beadie. I'll talk about one particular film to illustrate that. Excuse me, I'm going to work from a text. It's just the way I am. The film I'm going to be talking about is, actually, it's two films. Sri Lanka's Killing Fields, and then that was later further expanded to become No Fire Zone, the Killing Fields of Sri Lanka. And that was widely used in Geneva, but around the world in efforts to obtain accountability for massive human rights violations that were committed during the closing stages of the armed conflict in Sri Lanka. That was an armed conflict that started in 1983. In 2008, the government of Sri Lanka decided, after many efforts at negotiating a peace settlement over the years, many failed efforts, that it was going to obtain a military victory, and it pulled out all of the stops to pursue that military victory. An important part of the government strategy was to conduct a war without witnesses. So once the military strategy started in earnest, international organizations, UN, journalists, non-governmental organizations were moved out of the area of conflict. So it was a war without witnesses, and that was very deliberate. I should have said, as I'm talking, I'll show the trailer to the film. It'll be silent. That's just to save a bit of time. But I think the images in the trailer will help you understand much of what I'm about to say. And I should also say that it's a very big story about No Fire Zone. I'm just going to tell the Geneva part of that story, but it's much bigger than Geneva. Anyway, as the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelim, that was the organization fighting the, fighting the government of Sri Lanka. As the war was heating up and it was losing territory and pulling back into a much smaller area that it controlled, it was taking with it the Tamil civilian population. Some of that civilian population was moving voluntarily out of fear of the government forces. Some of it was being taken by the Tamil Tigers. And that population suffered enormously in the period between September 2008 and the end of the armed conflict in May 2009. It's estimated, the low-end estimate is that 20,000 civilians were killed. The high-end estimates is that 70,000 civilians were killed in that period most of them in the period between January and May 2009. While this war was going on, information was coming out. The Tamil Tigers had an excellent, call it propaganda, call it information apparatus, but it was getting images out. There were aid workers who, through contacts, were getting information. There was a sense that there was huge suffering in the population, but there wasn't much knowledge. When the armed conflict ended with the victory of the Sri Lankan military in May, it was on May 19th, it was the last day of the armed conflict. Again, it was known that the leaders of the LTT, most of them had been killed at the end of the conflict, but what wasn't known was how they were killed. What wasn't known in any real detail was what had happened to the LTT cadres, the fighters who'd surrendered or been captured at the end of the conflict. I say that there was knowledge about the human suffering, and that led to efforts in the Human Rights Council to convene a special session in an effort to try and relieve the suffering in the final stages of the conflict. When that special session finally took place, it was after the armed conflict was over. And what happened at that special session is the government of Sri Lanka, which had carried out very good diplomacy, it was able to essentially capture the special session, introduce the resolution, and the special session of the Human Rights Council adopted a resolution that essentially congratulated the government of Sri Lanka for defeating and eliminating the terrorist LTTE. That was a huge defeat for Western diplomacy. The echoes of that for Western countries and Latin American countries, as those countries that often bring resolutions, and other countries that are often resisting country-specific resolutions, the impact of that lasted for years. Anyway, let's come back to No Fire Zone. I'd mentioned that there was information that was emerging. That information continued to emerge after the end of the armed conflict that hinted at massive and serious human rights violations committed in the final stages of the armed conflict. I'm using human rights violations for shorthand for war crimes and crimes against humanity. I'm mixing a lot of legal concepts, but I think you get the sense what I'm talking about. And this is important. The response of the government of Sri Lanka, just as it had been throughout the armed conflict, was deny, deny, deny. This is all LTTE propaganda. This is confused Western NGOs. Our army conducted a clean war. There were 0 civilian candidates, and believe it or not, they would put that into documents. There were 0 civilian candidates. In late 2009, Amnesty International, we received video images of what appeared to be the cold-blooded murder, summary execution of captured LTTE cadres by members of the Sri Lankan Armed Forces. Those have been filmed with mobile telephones. They were war trophies. These images were aired by the UK television channel 4, and once again, the government of Sri Lanka came out quite forcefully, deny, 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 this is all propaganda, these are LTTE cadres dressed as Sri Lankan soldiers, didn't happen. Those images were examined by 2 UN human rights experts. There was one function called Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Executions, but there was a change in the mandate holder. So first of all, Philip Alston went to technical experts and had the video material. The video material analyzed, and he determined that this wasn't. It was real. There were real images that had been filmed with a mobile telephone. And then Christoph Haynes did the same thing in greater depth, and the results of their examination were presented to the Human Rights Council 2010, 2011. The response of the Sri Lankan government, deny, deny, deny. But those images also became the start of a project by Channel 4, Callum McRae, supported by Amnesty International, that brought together, collected many other mobile telephone video images and photographs from Tamil civilians in the group that was moving back with the LTTT, and other mobile telephone war trophies of Sri Lankan soldiers. And those were brought together in a documentary film, Sri Lanka's Killing Fields. It told a story of massive human rights violations, very different from the narrative of the government of Sri Lanka, which talked about liberating Tamil civilians in a humanitarian rescue operation with 0 civilian casualties. In early 2011, throughout, since the end of the armed conflict, there have been tentative efforts, mostly by NGOs, to try and re-engage the Human Rights Council on what had happened in Sri Lanka, but there from a perspective of accountability for the violations that had been committed. Anyway, in early 2011, those efforts were really gaining no traction. And again, this was the echoes of the 2009 special session. Among the obstacles of pursuing accountability in the Council were the difficulty of piercing the government of Sri Lanka's veil of denial. And of course, there was a political convenience for many governments that didn't want that veil pierced. They were happy to believe that nothing had happened, zero casualties. In 2011, a report was delivered to the UN Secretary General. He'd asked a panel of experts to look into the information about the end of the armed conflict. And that panel of experts report found credible allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity by the Sri Lankan Armed Forces and the LTTE, once again met by a blanket wall of denial. And this is important because it's against this background. Okay, I don't think I need that. I'll leave it. It was against this background that in June 2011, shortly after the Sri Lanka's killing fields had been completed and was being prepared for its first broadcast on Channel 4. Channel 4 agreed to allow Amnesty International, which we were joined by Human Rights Watch, to screen the film in a world premiere viewing at the United Nations in Geneva on the margins of the June 2010. That's a mistake. 2010, we were having no excuse me, please, I've got a typo here. June 2011, we screened it at the Human Rights Council. Callum McRae, the producer, director of the film, he came and he was there. It was an interesting session because we'd invited the Sri Lankan government. They knew that this film was going to be shown. They sent senior people from Colombo, and he was debating them in the room. And that was an interesting debate because it was clear who was more credible as that went on. Our director for Asia was also there for the screening. And that screening for me was a very memorable day because the room in which the screening took place was just packed. There was not an empty chair, and there were ambassadors who leaned against the back wall, the side walls of the room throughout the film. Very few people left. Often at side events at the United Nations, people have to go in and out because they've got other business. Well, that room remained full throughout the screening of the film and much of the conversation that followed it. And those people who attended were visibly moved by the film. You saw images in the trailer, the injured, there are images you don't see. One that I will mention is of a man who you see him with his young boy fleeing, and then later on you see him on a bus carrying a plastic bag, which are the remains of his young boy. Well, there's a diplomat who told me how when he saw that image, it just took him by the heart because he'd recently become a father of a young boy, and he identified with the man in the film. And I think that's what that film did. What Sri Lanka's Killing Fields did is it brought alive words on paper. Philip Alston, Christoph Heinz, the Secretary General's panel of experts, they did excellent analytical work, but that's words on paper. It's statistics. What the film did is the film gave life to those statistics, spoke about persons, not numbers, gave images of persons. And I think their emotion and empathy, as well as intellectual understanding, were brought together in the showing of that film. And it was a shift of perception or at least a shift of perception started to take hold in the Geneva diplomatic community. In September 2011, Canada launched an unsuccessful initiative for accountability in the Human Rights Council. Then in March, at the next session, March 2012, the USA took initiative. That resulted in a resolution that was adopted. It was followed by other resolutions in 2013, 2014. In 2014, the resolution created an international investigation to look into the massive violations of human rights and the law of war in the final stages of the armed conflict. That investigation reported to the Human Rights Council in September 2015, just last September, by which time a change in the government in Sri Lanka had allowed for the adoption of a resolution without a vote, establishing an accountability process to look into the massive human rights violations. It addressed other issues as well. When that resolution was adopted, those of us who've been working on human rights violations in Sri Lanka just didn't believe it. Had you asked us in 2009 if we thought that there would be a resolution calling for an investigation with international involvement 5 years later, all of us would have said you're dreaming. It just wasn't going to happen. Now, what's the role? Oh, no, sorry, what I forgot to mention was that as well, I'd mentioned that Callum McRae and his team had further developed Sri Lanka's killing fields, and the expanded version of that, additional images, some very powerful additional images, additional analysis, was produced in the film No Fire Zone, The Killing Fields of Sri Lanka. That was aired in the Human Rights Council in the second year of this series of resolutions on the 1st of March 2013. I wouldn't say that these two films were responsible for the resolutions adopted by the Human Rights Council on Sri Lanka, but I will say they played an undeniable role. The resolutions were the consequence of lobbying by NGOs in the Tamil diaspora in many capitals, electoral politics in some of the countries, skillful diplomacy, power politics, human rights research and reporting by NGOs in the United Nations, and much more. But No Fire Zone and its sequel, or its sort of the Killing Fields and its sequel, No Fire Zone, made it much easier for those alleging massive violations of human rights in Sri Lanka to gain a hearing. It became possible to talk to diplomats who hitherto didn't really want to talk about the issue. It just opened inroads to do the advocacy and the lobbying. And it wasn't just in Geneva that it did that. It did that in places around the world. Joanna, who spoke to us earlier about Virunga, one of her great successes in connection with No Fire Zone was shortly before Prime Minister Cameron went to Colombo for the Commonwealth Head of Governments meeting. He watched No Fire Zone, and he tweeted about that he'd watched it, and he was going to raise it at the Commonwealth Head of Governments meeting. Just a small Geneva postscript. One says, how do we know this makes a difference? It's in the human rights world when we're doing advocacy in the UN. That's often a question. How do we know it makes a difference? The length that the government of Sri Lanka went to prevent the screening of the film at the UN and to counteract the film. There's a book published. It goes more to Channel 4 than the film, but it's... challenging Channel 4's journalism. The ambassador of Sri Lanka wrote to the president of the Human Rights Council saying that Amnesty International and Human Rights could not show this film, that it was against the rules. And the president wrote back and said, no, it's not. They can do it if they want. But when governments go to those lengths, and that was a humiliating defeat for the Sri Lankans. The president of the Human Rights Council writes back, all of this is public, saying, sorry, but they can show the film. That's the end of the discussion. That shows what an effect that film was having, not just on civil society, not just on diplomats, but also on the Sri Lankan government. Yes, there.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. You raise a really interesting point, and it's a trend that, I know Joe is all too familiar with, but actually many other filmmakers are beginning to encounter, is that we're seeing exactly highly coordinated and, $1 million plus campaigns leveraged against filmmakers to try and discredit them and their journalism as quickly as possible, because it's a vital strategy. If a film can be as powerful as, and they knew it was, they hired an Bell Pottinger, to exercise a kind of a fantastic campaign to try and influence anyone who was related to the film team or a potential funder or partner to undermine the veracity of the journalism. So it's interesting, and we're seeing that very much as a rising trend, which, underlines the influence and the worry that folks have about the films and the conversations they'll trigger. Do we have a question or two for Peter on that particular film? Please, sir. Ah, he's my favourite. Hello.
Yes.
So will you introduce yourselves? We're dying to know who you are.
When you know, I am a freelance journalist, Boris Engelson. I am a bad journalist. I consider Breaking Bad a very good political film, and I have written once a story in French, Est-il bien d'être bon? Is it good to be good? Which triggered a fiery response letter of protest by Amnesty International Geneva. But I am also a fan of Peter since he arrived in the Palais, and I like to make one comment or ask a question about what Peter said. I would have other more general question on the topic of this roundtable, which we are going a little bit now away. It is essential to have reels like the ones which made the Killing Fields. It is undisputable that the Tamil community has been martyrized, and there were few evidences of what happened at the end. But this is not really, I would say, a film in the sense we are discussing here. It is like photo with commentaries of someone who was there when no one else could be there. For a journalist like me, who often attends side events, even on Sri Lanka at the Palais, the difficulty starts somewhere else. Not to deny all the horrors which have been made upon the Tamils, and with the support of the most peaceful organization in the world, that is the Buddhist clergy. But it comes when, in the room, in the side event, you have Tamils from other organizations. And they speak out as much against the tigers as against the government. Then you don't know, as a journalist, whom to believe, because it does not deny the horrors of what happened, but it may change the light you have on the root and why and causes and consequences. And then some people say, yes, these Tamil have been sold out to the government. It is sometimes true, it is not always true. And for a journalist, whatever the reals, if we cannot answer this question, why are there also Tamil organizations coming to the Palais des Nations during the Council of Human Rights, claiming to be also struggling for human rights, and having... Je ne fais pas ça pour moi, je fais ça pour les droits de l'homme. Excuse-moi, et je crois que c'est une question importante, et je sais que chaque mot que je prononce me fait plus mal voir, donc c'est pas du tout par plaisir personnel. Je crois qu'il y a une vraie question, et je pense que Peter reconnaîtra qu'il y a une question là-dedans. Is there or is there no question when a journalist is confronted with Tamil from other organizations, and how can a journalist find truth in that context? Although I accept all truth in the Killing Field. Yeah. That was maybe the question.
May I be so bold as to let, and this is the final question, forgive me, because I'm about to be fired by my hosts because I'm running over so much. Literally, they're never going to have me back in Geneva. I'm actually going to give this to Joanna, who worked on the film and worked with the filmmaker for years.
I would just say your question is totally valid, but it's important to say that all three films on No Fire Zone, The Killing Fields, the two of them, and all of the work of Amnesty and Human Rights Watch was to seek an investigation of the human rights violations on both sides. Importantly, on both sides. So I think your point was made clearly by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty and the film.
Thank you, sir, for your interventions. They've been lively and good, and they're keeping us on our toes. Please.
Very briefly. I won't get into your question, Boris, but we were faced with a government that deliberately had no witnesses and deny. So just the fact that the Killing Fields, No Fire Zone said there's a hell of a lot that happened. There's a hell of a lot that needs to be looked into. There's a hell of a lot of suffering. That moved it ahead. The film didn't need to answer who was at fault. As Joanna's pointed out, that's the role of the investigation, and it's a mess, but it'll get sorted out.
Yeah, and also finally, I'd like to also pay respect to the journalist behind this, Callum McRae, who's a highly experienced news journalist of many decades, who came into this story, and maybe the greatest mistake that the Sri Lankans made was actually to accuse Callum of being a liar, because it switched on in him. It's interesting. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. It turned a working journalist who was used to many stories, many different topics, like, yeah, move on to the next story. But when they told him, they said, you're a liar, and they tried to devalue his journalism, he, I don't know what happened, a switch flicked, and he has become utterly dedicated and devoted to pursuing this and to pursuing the case involved. And it's interesting. It's interesting as a kind of challenge, to an artist and filmmaker who refused to be silenced. Anyway, on that note, I'm sorry, they're going to kill me. We'll have a drink about it right now. We're literally going to have a drink and we can have that private conversation. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for your ideas and your questions. I hope we've given lots of food for thought. And one final huge thanks to our hosts who've been most generous. And I'm sorry I'm overrun and don't fire me.
No, we won't fire you. Actually, we would like to thank you so much for being a beautiful host for the morning. You've taken us through all these interesting panelists. I'd like to thank all the speakers and the filmmakers. I'm sure there are a lot of questions and a lot of things that needs to be dealt again. So that's why we have organized a little drink outside. So I hope you will stay with us and talk a little bit further. And I would like to ask all the speakers to come on the stage and we do a little picture. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. And hopefully this will go on a longer discussion. Thank you.